Hello, dear ghouls. It's time for a Sunday marathon of scary horror stories. So before I start, I just want to thank you all for your support. I do hope you're in your bed, ready to go asleep, because tonight's marathon will be wicked. I joined the army. Not because I wanted to, but because my father was in the military, and his father before that, and his father before that. So other than it being expected of me, I always just felt that it was the right thing to do. I thought I would be disappointing my family if I didn't also enlist. It was the worst mistake of my life. Other than the severe depression and PTSD, I experienced something that I cannot forget, no matter how hard I wish I could. At one point I was stationed at Fort Dietrich in Maryland. The details of how I wound up there aren't important, but I was there for much longer than I would have liked. The thing about the military is that you surrender all control to someone else. So no matter how much I wanted to leave that place, it really wasn't up to me. Something you need to know about Fort Dietrich is that back in the day, in the 1940s, shortly after the Pearl Harbor attack, the base was used to experiment with some pretty intense and bizarre biological weapon. It's a fact that most don't like to talk about, and it isn't mentioned all that often while on base. But it's there. There have always been rumors of some toxin or another accidentally being released into the air, but I always just played that off as childish, scary stories or twisted rumors. That is, until one night, I saw something that I can't unsee. In fact, I see it every time I close my eyes. I was going for a walk late one night when I couldn't sleep. It was a crisp and quiet night, and I was really enjoying the walk. It seemed as if the entire world had come to a standstill. Nothing seemed to be moving. Everyone seemed to have been asleep. It felt as if I was the only person in the entire world. All I could hear was the cool breeze and the sound of my own feet as I walked. I still remember wishing that I could freeze that moment and enjoy the peace for the rest of my life. At the time, I wasn't very happy. I hated being in the military, and I felt very lonely and isolated. As I was walking, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It sort of came out of nowhere. I was enjoying the silence and the peace and boom. It felt like there were a million eyes on me. I kind of stopped and peered around to see if I could see anyone else. I couldn't see anything, so I carried on walking. Then I felt it again, like eyes on me watching my every move. So I stopped walking. I looked around again, this time more carefully. I just couldn't shake the feeling. Then from behind the wall of another building, I saw something peering its head out at me. As it saw me spotting it, it ducked back behind the wall. It seemed unusual, like the behavior of a child, but much, much larger than a child. I took a few steps closer and called out to it, thinking it was just another person behaving strangely. I figured maybe they were smoking something or drinking when they weren't supposed to be. I walked around to where I had seen the thing, and there was nothing. I stood there for a while and wondered if maybe I had imagined the entire thing. Then I saw that the dirt had been disturbed where I was standing, so I knew I wasn't imagining it. At that point, I still thought it was a person, so I walked around the building to see if I could find them. I found nothing. I waited a moment to see if they'd come back, but then I heard a loud bang from the roof of the building. It startled me completely, and I stumbled backward a little bit. I landed on my butt and immediately looked up. On the roof was a massive skeletal creature. It looked like nothing but skin and bones, although it didn't look like a human at all. It seemed like there was something human about it. It frowned at me as if to figure out what it should do next. I was so afraid I couldn't get a word out, and I could hardly breathe. Before I could catch my breath, it scampered over the roof. It jumped from building to building almost too fast for me to keep track of. I saw it as it disappeared super fast. I sat on the ground for a moment afterward to make sure I wasn't dreaming. I don't know what I saw, but I know that I had a really hard time sleeping until I finally left that base. To this day, I can't help but wonder if what I saw was the result of some leaked biological toxin from from the 40s or something like that. To start things off, I'm not from the U.S. I live in Eastern Europe and I'm surrounded by mountains and woods from every side. It's basically a valley. I had a very odd encounter that made me read into our folklore, and the only thing that closely resembles the described entities are skinwalkers, and I'm here to ask for help from people that have more experience or knowledge on them. A month or so ago, late at night, I started hearing growling, or something along the lines of a big dog loudly snoring. I didn't really pay it any mind because I was on the phone talking to my boyfriend. Turned everything off so he can hear it as well. We both just assumed some dog snuck in my garden. Same thing happened a few more times over the span of the upcoming 3 weeks. This Monday I was out in my backyard having some wine at around midnight, and music was playing when I heard something like a dog or a cat running across leaves. I turned the music off and it happened again. To be honest, I was going to go up to check it out, but my boyfriend texted me not to, and to use flash look around. I did that, and near the walnut trees I have in the distance, I saw something resembling a human. But I wasn't sure what I'm seeing because my eyesight is not the greatest, and I wear glasses. So I decided to look through my phone, and as I was zooming in, my heart dropped because it definitely looked like a deformed human. I snapped a pic and bolted back inside. That was 3 nights ago, and every single night since then I feel like I'm sleeping half awake with the exception of last night, where I had a very vivid dream of a close friend of mine, acting unusual and having piercing green eyes. They're brown. Can anyone help with explaining how to get rid of entities resembling skinwalkers, if it even is that? I'm not easy to believe stuff like this, but it made me really paranoid, especially at night. I'm much older now, but when I was a young man in the 1960s, I was stationed at Mount Weather in Virginia. Up until the mid-70s, the base of Mount Weather wasn't very well known. I was chosen to be there because I had no near family. Actually, I had no family at all. I'd been an orphan, and so I had no next of kin or parents of any kind. I think that's largely why I was picked for what happened next. One day I was going about my usual daily business when I was told that I needed to attend an urgent and unplanned meeting. I followed the gentleman across the entire base, all the way to the other side. When I got to the meeting room, there were a bunch of generals that I didn't recognize at all. They were smiling as if they were excited to see me. They welcomed me in and offered me tea and coffee. The usual. From the get-go, I felt uncomfortable about it all. They sat me down and told me that they had an assignment for me. I needed to stand in for a guard. That was a way for his help. Seemed like kind of an odd meeting to have just to ask me to do such a simple task. I agreed, but they didn't seem too pleased yet. Then they explained to me that the guard I was replacing was stationed in one of the newer underground bunkers that had been built. I had known about them building it. I just didn't know anything about what their purpose was. That day, I learned that they had holding cells down there, and that everything that happened in the bunker was top secret. Immediately, it made my hair stand on end. Nothing about it sounded right, but I had already agreed to take the job, and I'm a man of my word. They wasted no time in taking me down there. The bunker was well lit and state-of-the-art for that era. They marched me fast through the halls. I barely had time to look at anything. At one point, I asked them to slow down so that I could remember how to get back when my shift was over. They informed me that when my shift was done, someone would come and get me. Again, I didn't like the way any of this was sounding, but I was already there, and I had already signed the paperwork. They put me outside this one room and instructed me to keep guard. They told me that inside was a dangerous prisoner, and that should something happen to pull the alarm that was on the wall to my left. I agreed, and they were on their way. Nothing about it seemed normal to me. But in those days, we trusted everyone that was in the military without question, so I did just that. It was a pretty uneventful night, and when my shift was over, someone came to fetch me and told me to be ready for them at the same time the following night. Again, I did as I was told, and the next night, they took me back to the cell that I needed to guard. This went on for 4 nights. On the 5th night, I was starting to get really bored of the job. Nothing happened. I had no idea who was in the cell, and I had no desire to look. There was a small window that could be opened up here inside, but I was under strict instruction not to do so. That night, though, something finally happened within the cell. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I heard a shrieking sound. It was loud enough to pierce right through the thick walls of the cell. The shriek was followed by intense banging. It sounded like something was being thrown from one side of the cell to the other. I could hear it bounce from one side of the cell to the other and off the roof of the cell even. It was insane. I waited a few minutes and it died down. With a sigh of relief, I carried on with my duty of standing guard. Then it happened again. But this time it was banging against the door of the cell, still shrieking loudly. It took me a moment, but I realized that the banging sound wasn't followed by the sound of something falling. This means whoever it was, they weren't throwing an item. They were throwing themselves around that room. It reminded me of a crazed animal that had been trapped against its will. I couldn't imagine who would have enough strength to throw themselves with that much force. So my curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the little window. I really wish I hadn't. What I saw was a creature so large. It filled almost the entire cell. It had completely white eyes and a wide snarl. Drool dripped from its open mouth as it shrieked again, rattling the small window. Not a single hair was on its body, and I could see the bones of its ribs and spine. It was clear that it hadn't eaten in a while. I slammed the window shut and hoped it would quiet down so that I didn't need to ring the alarm. Thankfully, that's exactly what happened. I've spent my entire life keeping this story to myself. In those days, we obeyed the rules without question, and so that's what I've done. They told me never to say anything, so I haven't. I figured that now all the men who I'd been in agreement with are likely dead, so I might be off the hook. I don't know what I saw, and I wish I hadn't seen it. Perhaps someone out there has the answers for me. One thing I can tell you, though, is that if something doesn't feel right, it's likely because it isn't. I spent a small part of my military career at the Harvey Point defense testing facility in North Carolina. Most people know that the base is completely shrouded in sea of mystery. The rumors and conspiracy theories about Harvey Point run strong and plenty. The facility is hidden away behind large fences and large trees. It's a fascinating place with a fascinating history. But I do hope that I never set foot there again. It's a fairly large facility, and most of the people there like to make friends, as is normal amongst humans. While I was there, I heard many people talking about an animal of some kind that would appear occasionally at night and scare one of the personnel. I was always one of the people who was just too busy to stop and chat, so I never really joined in the conversations. I always just heard it in passing. From what I could gather, though, the animal was terrifying. It had scared some personnel so badly that they needed counseling. I just figured it was a large dog or a bear or something. Anyway, it seemed to be a rather hushed topic of discussion. I had heard many people talk about other people having seen it, but I had never heard anyone actually say that they had seen it. So I brushed it off most of the time. I had never really thought anything of it. I was always too busy to pay attention. And I didn't care much for spooky campfire stories. That is, until I discovered that it was nothing at all like a spooky campfire story. I was walking through the base one night taking some paperwork with me. For the life of me, I can't remember exactly where I was going. But I know that I was walking with determination. I had my head down and I was looking at the papers when I walked directly into something. I remember noticing at first that it felt like human skin, as if I had walked into someone who was completely naked. Only this thing was completely cold. Keep in mind, all of this happened within a matter of seconds. I looked up, and staring at me is what looks similar to what I imagine a shaved bear looks like. Only the skin was pale, and it was about 3 times the size of a large bear. It was scrawny, and it breathed heavily. I was completely frozen in place. I didn't know what to do. Should I run? Should I call for help? I knew for sure that attacking wasn't an option. The large claws on that creature told me that it could kill me with one hit, so I just stared, unable to breathe from fear. The creature just huffed and scampered off into the darkness, leaving me there in a state of pure panic. The sweat was running down my back when I finally caught my breath, but with every second that I stood outside, I felt more and more unsafe. So I turned and went back to bed, forgetting all about the paperwork in my hands. That night I didn't sleep at all. I just thought about whether or not I should tell someone what I had seen. But then I remembered the way that other people spoke about those who had come into contact with the creature, and all of it had been negative. Those people had been called weak, crazy, unstable, unable to serve. I didn't want that for myself. So I decided that I would just rather keep quiet and never walk through the base at night again. The thing that scared me most about it was that I found myself constantly wondering how it got inside the facility, or if it was rather trapped in there with no way out. My experience happened in late June 2019. The location was Governor Dick Park, which is located in southern Lebanon County. I live in a town called Littitz, which is only about a 25-minute drive away in neighboring Lancaster County. It is a major residential hub for those folks who work and commute in Philadelphia. It is only a little over an hour's drive away from here. The girl I was dating at the time wanted to go for a hike at the park. It was a Saturday morning, so we went. It was quite hot out, easily into the 90s, however. We made our way up the main trail toward the top of a couple of trails. Some are for foot traffic, and others are for horses. There's another trail that is for mountain bikes. As we hike up toward the top of the hill, Mount Gretna, there's a decent-sized tree that was bent over the trail and wedged into another tree on the opposite side. There were several folks gathered there in awe of it. I had been interested in Bigfoot for some time and knew about tree bends. This wasn't caused by the weight of the snow. The bark, right where it was bent, was twisted off, and the branches of it were wedged into the branches of the trees on the opposite side of the trail. I wasn't at the peak of the hill, and the tree wasn't facing the prevailing winds in the area. We continued to hike to the top of the mountain. We reached the tall watchtower and climbed the steps to the top. Now, I have pets from an event that I won't get into here, so I want to describe how climbing the top of this involves climbing short ladders that are enclosed in a concrete tunnel. When you get to the top, you have to step off to the side and grab the next ladder climb. These are tight quarters with an escape out. The intense heat could trigger uneasy feelings. We reached the top. I took in the beautiful view, but quickly, and then we descended back down to ground level. When we got to the bottom, there was an open area away from the structure which opened up to the top of the hollow, so I walked over there with her to get a breather and have a cigarette. Just as I approached the crest of the ridge, where I could look down to the hollow, I heard what sounded like a very large man let out a guttural raw groan. I have enough time in the woods to be able to gauge sounds. The issue was a man sounded that loud from that distance, as if he were only 5 yards from me. The entire area is choked with mountain laurels and briars, so no human would have been there. I didn't say a word to my girlfriend, and she didn't say a word to me about the sound. I only said, "Come on, let's go get some lunch." We headed back down the main trail. I've never felt more naked and vulnerable. She talked about some mundane stuff which I occasionally responded to. I wasn't really listening to her, and was only focused on the hollow on her right from where that sound came. When we hit the last stretch of the trail, where it sort of bottomed out and became flat again, I happened to look down and saw a stack of large, smooth rocks stacked neatly on the top edge of the trail. These rocks weren't there when we walked up, and they weren't native to that area. Rocks that you find on the typical forest trail have edges, but these rocks were completely smooth and looked like they came from a creek. I recognized the stacked rocks as a recognition of me heeding the beast's verbal warnings. We reached our lunch destination. When I brought up the sounds, my girlfriend admitted hearing what I heard but had no idea what it was. I filled her in on my thoughts of the incident, and needless to say, she was skeptical but in an uneasy way. Now, to start everything off, I live in northern Quebec, and I've lived there for about 17 years now. My grandfather used to take me hunting out in woods when I was 10. He told me one of his stories when I was younger about a wendigo that was possibly hunting in the woods. He had told me that livestock have mysteriously gone missing. The animals have been eaten or just taken is what his thoughts were. But his thoughts were canceled out when he seen this giant deer one day. This deer, he said, was the biggest deer he's ever seen, as in his entire life could have easily weighted at least 400 pounds. So as he picked up his gun when he saw the deer, he dialed in his sight for the range at least 200 feet out. When he dialed in his sight, he aimed and banged. He said he shot the deer at least twice with a 308 Lapua butt. The deer never stood a chance, he said, but yet the deer still stood tall. So my grandfather, after a couple of seconds of thinking, I remembered this very vaguely, but he picked me up and ran as fast as he could. Once we got back to the cabin, he was out of breath going downstairs into the basement, picking up every single gun he owned, loading it and cocking it. It was just me, my grandfather, my dad, and my brother-in-law at the time. We all held our guns up high, except for me with my tiny little .22 caliber, thinking I would do some damage. We anxiously waited for this beast to follow us into the cabin, but after 45 minutes of waiting, nothing happened. Later that day, around 7 a.m., we decided to pack our stuff and get the hell out of Dodge, but once we got back into the city, we were all very shaken up, and it was a very, very quiet ride home. I'm 32 now, but I remember my father telling me a story when I was 15, saying that Grandpa went out to the same exact woods and never came back. We have never heard from or seen my grandfather ever again. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Oh, you guys just saw a deer and your grandfather overreacted, maybe. But it was very, very quiet. The air was very still. There was not a single sound to be heard, so we think possibly it might have been a wendigo. But here's the thing. After my father told me the story when I was 15 years old, I've certainly heard some things outside my window. It's been very quiet at night at times, as when I'm sitting outside having a cigarette, but maybe whatever was in those woods when I was 10 years old started to follow us back from Quebec, and those woods. Why do I think this, you might ask? My dog Charlie has gone missing for 2 weeks now. He always, and I mean always, comes back when we whistle and call his name. There has been no dogs looking like Charlie at the pound. No one has seen a dog like Charlie. So we maybe think that something from those woods took Charlie. That's what my dad thinks. I personally think Charlie may have run away. So my question to you guys is, what do you think might have been in those woods when I was 10 years old in Quebec? And did it follow us back? I've only been living here at Snow College for a couple months, but something strange is definitely happening here. For context, I am part Native American of the Lakota Sioux tribe, and I'm trying to reconnect with that part of my heritage as I have moved out and away from my parents. I have always believed in the existence of skinwalkers, but the events that have transpired over the past couple of months have solidified it for me. At first, the occurrences started out small, hearing footsteps, growling in bushes, etc. But as the weeks have gone on, they have gotten to be bigger and bigger and bigger. It all came to a head Saturday night when I get a frantic text from a good friend of mine saying that he's messed up big time and scared shitless. Now, this friend of mine is a very imposing dude, 6'2", around 280, and he grew up around Baltimore, so it takes a lot to scare him. So he's going through and telling me what happened and what he saw. A couple blocks away from the main campus, they're building a new temple, and this friend loves to walk around this area at night. According to him, just past the one streetlight on this road, he could see a massive dog pacing back and forth, east to west. He described it as a dog with the posture of a bear, toned build, obviously wild, but no discernible fur on it, like it was completely in silhouette. So, of course, I do some research and see the accounts of the Sherman family on their ranch, and Gwen's description of a wolf dog she ran into sounds eerily similar to what my friend saw. What my friend neglects to tell me until we were out there again last night is that he was whistling on his walk. As we approached the spot where he saw it the night before, sitting under the streetlight, was the creature. It was exactly as he described it. Huge dog, posture of a bear, pointy ears, smoothest skin I've seen on a wild animal ever. We're both rightfully spooked, so we head back towards campus as we're walking past the Humanities building. He tells me that it was around this spot where he was seeing shadow figures. He described them as having distinct human forms and hearing what sounded like a huge animal running at him. He came across a bald eagle feather in the middle of the sidewalk. There haven't been any bald eagle sightings in Ephraim, from what I know. We hung out on campus for a while after our encounter by the temple grounds, and we both were able to come to the conclusion that there was almost like a line across campus that the sightings would stop. Against my better judgment, I'm planning on going out there again later tonight to see if I could maybe get any pictures of this thing for concrete evidence that we both saw something, and that it wasn't just our nerves getting to us. We located a trail in the snow that went from the road down an embankment, through the creek, up another embankment to a lookout-type spot where you could see the road but not be seen. Then the tracks went back down through the creek and back to the road about 20 feet from the start of the tracks. Also, we think someone was trying to lure it to the road because we found a banana peel in a tree and an apple on the side of road. Tracks looked to be a couple days old. I am currently living with my partner on an Outback property in Australia. Our neighbors are across the road, pretty big driveways on both our properties though, but still close enough to see their house clearly and whatnot. There's cows in the paddocks that surround our property. We could go up and pet them if we wanted to. And there's sheep a couple paddocks over, but they're far enough from the property that they're like white dots in my vision. You never hear the sheep, only the cows. We have our Christmas lights set up now, and they have timers set so that they're on from like 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. to 12 a.m. From the room we're staying in, they wrap around the whole veranda facing the neighbor's house. We can see the lights through our two windows, and I really like to have the blinds up at night because of this. Anyways, at around 10 p.m., my partner and I were settling down for sleep in our room. He notices that the cows are making noises like the sheep, and we joked about this for a bit. He even joked that it could be a skinwalker. I, however, did not find that funny because I've heard that even talking about it, let alone joking about it, could attract them. I'm a believer, so I was getting bad vibes after he said that. He falls asleep, and I'm just watching videos on my phone and playing games. Occasionally I'll hear the same sheep noises. They genuinely sounded like actual sheep, so I was pretty freaked out. Christmas lights made me feel protected, at least a tiny bit protected, because I felt like they'd be sensitive to the light and wouldn't want to be too close to it. That being said, I also felt like a deer in headlights. I genuinely felt like I was being watched, like it was a strong vibe, but I still tried to ignore it. 12 a.m. hits, and I don't realize this until the Christmas lights suddenly turn off. Now, I don't know if they make a noise like someone flipping a switch when they do this or not. I was asleep each time it's turned on and off before this moment. But that's exactly what it sounded like. I'm literally frozen in bed, and I'm tearing up a bit telling the story. And all I can think is that something went ahead and took the liberty to turn those lights off, and the switch for those being maybe 5 steps away from one of the windows in our room. Every now and then, from 10 p.m. onwards, I've heard the occasional sheep, which is almost physically impossible given how far away they are. These noises sounded like they were coming from the cow paddocks, and the fact I'm hearing it now in the pitch darkness of my room, feeling like I'm being watched and hearing the additional strange sound outside every now and then, like something on the veranda or something moving outside. I'm spiraling, dude. So me being me, I decided that I'm terrified of the dark, and I'm hyperfixating on these noises and shit. Let's put the TV on. Listen to some sleep music or something, you know. Dumbest idea, I turn the TV on. It lights up. I go on YouTube and put on some bussin' sleep music. I go from hearing like one sheep every now and then to hearing several. Clear as Emeth day, these noises were definitely sheep. Not to mention the strange noises outside were now becoming more frequent. Also, a cow starts screaming. Now they've done this before almost every night, actually. Usually it's like a build-up, almost like a moaning scream that slowly gets louder. It's like repetitive, like, oh, not just oh. I don't know, bro. But last night, it went from hearing several sheep to hearing a cow suddenly start doing the screaming with absolutely no build-up. There was genuine desperation or something in this noise, and it didn't last as long as they usually do. Usually it's like 10 seconds or something. This was like 4 or 5 seconds. I start watching shit on my phone, ignoring any and every noise outside, trying not to break down from absolute fear until I just about pass out. I wake up in the morning, not a single sheep noise, no loose sheep in the paddocks around the house, but I'm too scared to check the lights had been tampered with, and I'm too scared to see if there's a dead cow or some shit. I wanted to get any form of answers. I can hear. Keep in mind this shit has never happened before. We only ever hear cows and only cows. I know there's not much happening in this story, but I've never had any type of experience like this. I was fishing the creek and I waded in the creek to get past a willow thicket. When I got back in the open, the hair on the back of my neck stood up and I stopped and looked around. I spotted a large, blackish, brown thing in the creek. I thought it was a bear till it looked up and I saw its face. I stood still and waiting to see what would happen. Then thing looked back down. Then to my left front a loud screaming grunt and the sound of limbs breaking scared the shit out of me. The thing in the water stood up and started to walk away, grunting and howling as it went. There was a smell of rotten eggs and shit in the air. The thing I saw was about 6 feet, 5 to 7 feet tall and walked upright. The arms were huge and longer than normal. On the last day of our vacation, we were driving to dinner when my dad saw strange, about 14-inch tracks on the side of the road. The next day, we were driving to the airport when all of us saw the strange tracks, and there was about 50 to 100 yards of them. We saw the Bigfoot tracks in kind of brown dirt and sand. They were about 14 inches and at least 4 feet apart. There was about a 100-yard trail of tracks. I saw the rake or something that I call the rake. I can tell you what it was. I was driving late at night in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. I live 30 miles south of Alamoso, Colorado. I was driving on a back road with my buddy taking him home near my house. It was about 12 a.m. Out of nowhere, this thing appeared in the headlights in the middle of the road. It was crouching over some roadkill. It was humanoid. It was pale. It looked like it had no ears. It looked like a wendigo from Until Dawn looked like it was 7 feet tall. Abnormally long arms. No ears, no nose, and some nasty teeth. It wasn't skinny, but its skin was tight with ribs visible. And like long claws on the end of its hands, I was barely able to dodge it with my truck as I was driving considerably fast. As I swerved around it, it seemed like time slowed down, and it looked up from the roadkill it was eating and stared at me as I passed. Its eyes were yellow. I immediately brake and yell at my friend, "What the F did you see that?" His eyes were wide with fear and he nods at me. I throw the truck in reverse, but when I approach the roadkill, it was gone. And he claims to have seen it too. So I know I'm not crazy. When I was a kid, I read a lot of stories about the rake. I know the rake isn't real, so maybe they invented a creature that already existed. Maybe it's a cave creature, like in The Descent. If you have any questions, please ask. I've been doing a lot of research. I want to find out what this is. I've been obsessed with him. I need answers. I won't stop looking for him. I am a park ranger at Yellowstone National Park. The vast landscape with its towering mountains, pristine lakes, and sprawling forests is truly a sight to behold. But beneath the picturesque exterior lies a dark and dangerous secret. One summer day, as I was conducting a routine check of the park's trails, I heard a strange noise in the distance. Curiosity piqued. I decided to investigate. But what I encountered was far from what I expected. As I approached the source of the noise, I saw a massive, unknown predator. Its fur was matted, and its eyes glinted with a malevolent hunger. It was unlike any animal I had ever seen before. Before I could even reach for my radio, the creature attacked. I was outnumbered and outmatched, but I refused to give up. I fought with all my might, using every ounce of my strength and training. It was a struggle for survival, with the unknown predator intent on taking me down. Just as I was about to lose consciousness, the creature suddenly vanished into thin air. I was left alone, wounded and confused, but I was alive. I soon realized that what I had encountered was far more than just a wild animal. It was something paranormal, something beyond my understanding. But I was determined to survive, and I was going to get to the bottom of this strange and frightening encounter. Unfortunately, I hit a dead end. After this encounter, I never again encountered this creature. I spent 2 years more as a park ranger, then I quit. Still to this day, I wonder where that creature left, or was it even real? Little background, I'm agnostic and pretty skeptical. I don't believe in really anything paranormal, but I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and the time of this story was during the late 80s, early 90s, mid-satanic panic era. There was a lot of circulated rumors about this or that being demonic, and you had to be careful about what you brought into your house lest you invite demons into your home. So I guess they're like vampires or bedbugs. Also, lots of urban legend stories, a lot of them involving Smurfs, like Smurf wallpaper, stomping newborns to death in their sleep and the like. Important to understand is that Jews don't believe in ghosts or aliens or anything else. But rather than discount the stories themselves altogether, they merely blame them on bored, vindictive demons messing with us because they've been banished to earth. As they are fallen angels. Oh, an interesting side note. Apparently this eviction from heaven only happened in 1914, not sure why God waited so long. Maybe it's like renter's protection and he needed to give them tons of notice and a free month's rent or something. But I digress. So yeah, basically if there was a J.W. Scooby-Doo cartoon, every ending would be the same. Now let's see who's really behind this. And they'd remove the rubber alien mask, the glowing ghost sheet, the dinosaur fossil. I knew it. Just a regular old demon. Anyway, around 10 years old, I started being left home alone. Big family, so it didn't happen much. But when it did, I started noticing things from the corner of my eye, around the edges of darkened corners. Only a couple of times did I notice a discernible shape, and it looked like this stuffed toy someone in the house had recently gotten, black-furred, big-nosed, kinda goofy yet terrifying in the right context. I guess think Five Nights at Freddy's style. Sometimes I'd get so freaked out I'd bolt out of the house with barely a jacket or shoes on and sit outside my house in the winter. I can't remember what excuse I gave when my family came home and found me shivering on the stoop, but I didn't tell them the truth. I even started to join my mom on painfully boring errands. Kids nowadays will likely fail to understand what hours of errands at the hair salon, dry cleaners, the bank or Fanny's fabrics is like without cell phones or Nintendo Switches. At best, we had Tiger handheld games, which were typically less fun than simply staring at your hands. But I endured it all rather than be left alone with the demons. In retrospect, all of this is easily dismissed, young mind crammed full of the idea that the world is teeming with demons out to get him, is left alone for the first time in his life, and his mind conjures demons out of flickering shadows. But it's what comes next I can never hand-wave away quite so easily. I'm about 11-ish, I think, and I lose one of my last baby teeth. Maybe my last one, I don't remember, but it's a molar. Dubs famously don't celebrate anything, but there is few things that weren't forbidden. I just don't remember if we did. The tooth fairy thing. I know there was no pretense of a fairy, just my mom taking my tooth and giving me $1. But I know I didn't get $1 for this last one. Maybe it was too late in the game, being the last-ish tooth and being the youngest of 8 kids. The kid tooth market was now incredibly saturated. She probably had a coffee can full. Technically, she might have even qualified as an ivory dealer. So I go to bed that night, and I have an oddly specific memory of putting my tooth on my bedside table on the metal base of my lamp. I wake up sometime during the night, and it's full, deep, silent, scary night. Not my parents are still awake, and I can hear them watching MASH in the living room night. It's one of those half-awakes where your dreams are still a vivid reality, and you can effortlessly step back into them. I'm instantly aware of a large, blue-ish, white glowing presence at the end of my bed. It's an angel with its back to me, focused on something else, which is odd in and of itself, as the only thing in that part of my room of interest was my Dick Tracy action figures. So hopefully he was bringing me the blank figure, because I couldn't find that shit anywhere. I don't remember if I could move, but I didn't. I was scared, but in an oddly detached, non-panicky sort of way. He became aware of me and looked back, and not in a malevolent way, but not kindly either. It was more of a cold, slightly sneering indifference. Then I just fell back asleep, which was obviously odd had it been someone innocuous like my mom in my room at 3 a.m. I doubt I'd have drifted back off so quickly, let alone a potentially fallen angel rooting through my collectibles. I loved those Dick Tracy toys, and I was very paranoid and protective about losing the Tommy guns on those things. It happened to a JW pal of mine. His mom took him all their weapons, and he was left with a bunch of squat, Lego, grip-handed, suited old men with stupid hats, and who wants to play with that? But I digress again. Then I just awoke in the morning, but I didn't immediately remember the previous night's visitor. I woke just like any other morning, sat up but then paused during my crooked U-stretching as I rested on my molar, still on the lamp base, but it had been expertly cut in half. It was perfectly smooth, like it had been done with a laser, and the other half was gone. I didn't immediately suspect my mother. Firstly, I doubted she had access to that level of technology. And second, if it was her, then where was my 50 cents? Only then did I recall the previous night's events, and as you can imagine, it shook me up. There was the spooky paranormal aspects that would scare anyone, but atop all that was the sheer randomness of it. Nothing added up to anything. It was just an absolute casserole of nonsense. Now had the demon angel burnt a cockeyed 666 on my wall and left a steaming cauldron stuffed with Smurf merchandise, then okay, sure, I'd have been terrified, but at least it would have been on brand and fallen neatly into place with everything else I knew. But what the F did he want with half my tooth? I snatched up my half-tooth and went to find my mother, not really expecting answers, but at least wanting someone else to acknowledge and share in this messed-up situation. When I found her, I didn't editorialize or bring up any of the angel business, just handed it over with a, "Hey, look, what happened to my tooth when I was asleep?" She examined it closely, but far too briefly, and handed it back with something like, "Huh, that's kind of weird, hey? Where's your father? Tell him breakfast is ready." Her lack of astonishment felt suspect. I went looking for my dad with the inner monologue of a TV detective. No, I don't think she did it, but she knows more than she's telling us. I didn't even bring it up to my dad, as my relationship with him was fraught, and it felt unwise to do so. More than likely, I'd have been blamed for it in some way, and I'd be interrogated about my cola consumption. So I sat on this info. I think I tried to bring it up casually with my mom again later, but again got nothing. A week or so later, it was missing off my dresser. I thought I maybe knocked it off or something, and it'd show up eventually, but it never did. Shortly after this incident, we moved to a new house, and I never saw the flickering shadows demons again. I never had any more issues with being left alone in the house. As a skeptical adult looking back, I can say, look, I turned 12. I got over my fear of being home alone, and maybe I conjured the angel memory from nothing after that tooth incident. But that doesn't explain the tooth. And I remember the tooth. I could feel myself grasping for plausible scenarios. Maybe there's some medical test that requires an inner tooth test, so my parents took it. But then why not just tell me? Why return the other half? It's the whole issue with this incident, as even if you accept the existence of angels, demons, ghosts, or the chupacabra, it doesn't really explain anything meaningful. So yeah, that's it. I don't think about it often, but when I do, it still bothers me. So at the end of all of this, I just hope someone or something is waiting for me, and they have with them half my tooth and some goddamn answers. In 2012, I was driving through southern Utah with a friend, completely empty desert land surrounded by mountains, and both of us saw something, or several somethings, actually. They were running alongside the car, but we were faster at 80-ish miles per hour and left them behind. They were incredibly tall. My friend remembers them being tan-colored, but I thought they were more white. Definitely not the color of any animal I know in the area. And by tall, I mean more than twice as tall as the car, or more so 8+ feet. They were running on all fours right next to the road. Their legs were very thin and tall, and I remember seeing large ears on the top of the head like a bunny. But my friend doesn't remember that. I also think, since they reminded me so much of the rideable creatures in the Dark Crystal, my brain might have added the ears. But those are the closest comparisons I have to what I think we saw. Google Dark Crystal land striders if you want a comparison. We both saw them and freaked out to the point of us both screaming, and we never knew what we had seen. Is there a known cryptid that looks like this lives in this area? This event took place over a year ago, but I hadn't really thought to post about it until now. I don't want to dox myself, but I live in Maryland, and I was with my now ex-girlfriend at her house. It was a rural area surrounded by woods in all directions. It was night, and we were going to visit her grandparents' house a short drive away. We got into her car, and while she was fiddling with her phone and the aux cord, I saw something in the brush, illuminated by the headlights. It was tall, pale gray, thin with a gaunt face and stretched limbs. I don't think it stood to the standard 8 feet of a crawler, but my lack of depth perception makes it hard to accurately perceive distance and height. All it did was watch, its seemingly hollow eyes fixed me. It was gone before I could point it out to my girlfriend, and I didn't have the bravery or stupidity to investigate. I wish I had concrete evidence of what I saw, but all I have is my word and a terrifying memory. I work in a pub. It's about 2 miles away in the next village. I usually finish work late, 1-2 a.m., and I have to cycle home. The only route is a small road that goes through somewhat large woods. There's a 1-mile stretch that has absolutely no streetlights. It's pitch black. As I was cycling through the woods, I start hearing this screeching sound, similar to a small animal dying. It scared the shit out of me, so I started pedaling fast. I continued to hear it, and it seemed as it was progressing towards me. I used my phone's camera light to navigate, although it isn't impossible to see without it. I point my phone behind me and I swear I caught sight of some humanoid creature on all fours running at me. Call it mind games, but this was pretty vivid. I continue to cycle as fast as I can. I've been cycling long distances from a young age. I'd like to say I'm quite fast. Yet I continue to hear the screeching and the light patting of the footsteps of whatever is chasing me. I try to turn my phone light off, and after a few seconds I manage to do so. The padding becomes quieter, and I hear one last screech from whatever it was. I have never been so scared in all my life. My story starts like this. I'm from the Navajo Nation Indian Reservation, in a small place located 30 south of Page, Arizona, known as Bitter Springs. This event happened in March 2022, in the early hours of the morning at 2:45 a.m., when I was coming back from work in Las Vegas. I work in Las Vegas Monday through Thursday, and my route is usually traveling through Las Vegas to Kanab, then back to Page, Arizona. I got into the town of Page, Arizona, coming back from Vegas around 3 a.m. and stopped at a gas station to fuel up and buy a snack to keep me awake. After that, I left the gas station, and I started traveling south towards Bitter Springs on Highway 89 that goes towards Flagstaff. I was the only vehicle traveling on that dark and secluded road. I have to admit that I was thinking about skinwalkers and the story that my grandma used to say when we were younger kids at her house. She used to say that she had seen a, gloosh, she or skinwalker. Once before that had followed her back to her house on the same route I was going and kept bothering her when she tried to sleep. Just then, the rain began to start falling, and the clouds started to cover the bright moon above. As I approached a steep hill 3 miles before Bitter Springs, a vehicle passed me as it was making its way up the Bitter Springs Canyon oncoming. But as that vehicle passed me in the oncoming lane, I could just remember the light was so bright as if the driver forgot to dime his light as he approached me. Just as he passed, I seen a creature which looked like a man wearing a skin with a black and white face with glowing eyes like a deer. The object couldn't have been anything or creature of this world. As it crossed the road, I could remember that the creature looked right at me in my eye. The creature's eye had made contact with me and gave a weird vibe. As it crossed the road, it then jumped over a fence on the side of the road and traveled quickly into the darkness. I then thought to myself, did I just see what I thought I had seen? I then proceeded in terror and hauled ass, going down the Bitter Springs Canyon. I never in my life traveled down the canyon at 85 miles per hour, especially when it was raining. As soon as I got down the canyon, I turned off at the Bitter Springs housing and seen the creature again by the cattle guard. As I approached it, it took off to the south into the darkness. I then thought to myself, how the hell did that creature get to the turnoff before I did? Right then, I knew this thing, or creature was for sure a skinwalker following me. As I got to my driveway at my house, which was 1,000 feet from the turnoff, I ran inside and locked the door. About 5 minutes, I heard banging at my window and heard a coyote howling, but the howling was off. It also had an awful smell like a dead, rotten animal. Later, when the sun came up, I checked the surroundings of my house and seen coyote tracks around my house, which tracked back to the south. In October of 2021, I encountered what I believed to be an extraterrestrial inside my house, followed soon after by 3 other extraterrestrials in my house. It was a normal Friday evening at first. My dad, I was in college in Montana, living with him at the time, had gone to sleep at about 10 p.m., and I stayed up until about 11:30. At 11:30, I turned off my TV and went to lay on my bed, where I promptly pulled out my phone and began browsing. This lasted for about 45 minutes before I finally decided to go to sleep. I realized that my throat felt a little dry, so I got up to get some water from the fridge. My room used to be a second living room off the kitchen, so there's no door on the frame, only a thick curtain. As I approached the curtain, everything was normal. It was just a normal night. The only thing that seemed a little off was how quiet it was. There were no crickets chirping outside, which there always were. I live in a secluded country ranch house, which was unusual. I could still hear my dad's white noisemaker in his bedroom, though he uses it to help him sleep. It felt like a normal late night. I pulled the curtain aside to step out into the kitchen and experience the single most terrifying thing in my entire life. Behind the curtain was what I believed to be an extraterrestrial alien. It was facing the hallway to my dad's room, and it was in a crouched position. We had a nightlight plugged in right above the kitchen countertop, so I assume it was trying to avoid that light. Its skin color was a sort of dark gray gunmetal color. As I pulled the curtain all the way back, the alien turned its head sharply to look at me. I gasped and was immediately overcome by an immense sense of dread and terror. I was quite literally paralyzed by fear. I just stood there with my hand on the curtain, mouth agape. I regained consciousness an hour later and was laying on top of my bed, the covers still made. My heart was pounding, and it felt like it was beating 1,000,000 times a minute. I saw something on my left, which was the darkest part of my room, and had a door leading to our carport. Standing over my bed were 3 dark gray figures. They were tall, their heads nearly touching the 7-foot ceilings in my room. I turned my head, stared at them, and began to experience the same sense of terror as before. It was the exact same sense of dread and paralysis. I was unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything except look. This time they looked at me for much longer than a couple of seconds. It felt like it lasted a full minute or more. At the end of that minute, the being in the middle leaned in a little bit and moved its hand toward my foot. It tapped its finger on my foot 3 times, slowly. Each time it tapped, a strange sensation pulsed through my body. It was just a weird energy that I can't really describe. After the 3rd pulse subsided, the being stood straight again, and then everything went black again. I regained consciousness yet again a minute or 2 later, still on top of my bed, covers still made, and immediately began to cry. I don't mean just a tear or 2. I mean that I was quite literally just bawling my eyes out for the next few minutes. Eventually, all that emotion subsided, and I grabbed my phone from my bedside table. It was 1:33 a.m. I didn't end up going to sleep at all that night. I just sort of sat there on my bed trying to explain to myself what just happened. In the years since this has happened, I've yet to come up with an explanation that doesn't involve aliens, demons, ghosts, or some sort of paranormal phenomenon. I thought of sleep paralysis at first, but I never went to sleep before I saw the first one. I was wide awake still when I went to get a drink of water. I wasn't dreaming because I hadn't yet gone to sleep. When the 3 came right after, I thought that it could be sleep paralysis since I woke up on my bed and was unable to move or even scream when they looked at me. But how did I get in bed when the last thing I remember was looking at the first one in my kitchen? I know you hallucinate when experiencing sleep paralysis, but how did I see 3 distinct beings that essentially remained motionless? And what was that sensation whenever it tapped my foot? If it was sleep paralysis, I've never had it before, and I haven't had it since. If it was some sort of spontaneous mental breakdown, I've never had one before, and haven't had one since. If it was just some bad nightmare, when did I go from browsing Reddit and getting a drink of water to asleep and having a nightmare? Every time I think about it, I get an uneasy feeling just thinking about the dread I felt that night. It makes me feel squirmy and nervous. That night felt like death, but I don't know if whatever was in my house or whatever I imagined was malevolent. I don't know if they hurt me or did anything to me or my dad. I don't know if I was crazy, sleep, deprived, or actually encountered aliens in my house. I've seen and felt some strange things before and after, including lost time, seeing what I believe to be UFOs and animals on the ranch we live on being mutilated. The lost time thing was a little freaky. I was texting my brother about video games in the middle of the morning. I was in the middle of a response, laying on the bed in my room, when all of a sudden I was sitting on the couch in the first living room, opposite the kitchen to my bedroom. 7 whole hours had passed, and I didn't remember any of it. There were 2 texts from my brother, about an hour apart. The first of which was him asking if I got his texts. Then the second was just a couple of question marks. I was confused and didn't really know what to do. The UFOs thing is self-explanatory. I've seen lights fly over my house at night. There is an airport about an hour away, and I see planes on occasion. But these lights are always either too fast to be a plane, too slow to be a plane, or too quiet to be a low-flying helicopter. The animal mutilation thing is the saddest part for me. I have about 10 outside cats or barn cats that I feed regularly and who keep away snakes, bugs, and whatnot. Most of them are spayed, neutered, and vaccinated, but new ones show up still and get pregnant somehow. Every so often, one of them gets killed, be it by a mountain lion, stray dog, coyote, or other cat. It's gruesome, but it happens. But there have been a couple in the past few months that have made no sense, and all have been the same way. A single cut down the middle of their bodies, running from their jaw all the way to their genitalia. The cut goes all the way through their sternum and everything. It's always perfectly straight, and none of their internal organs or anything is damaged. It's like someone took a razor or something and slit them. We found them on our driveway in the private road leading to our driveway. There's never any blood, and the cat is just dead on the ground, already in rigor mortis. It makes no sense, and it makes me sad because I've raised most of those cats from kittens. To give some background, my family owns a trailer home which sits on a cliff overlooking Lake Kootenay in the south of the Canadian province of British Columbia. This trailer was used as a sort of a summer getaway destination, as my parents and I visit for about a week or more each summer. The trailer itself is quite old. It was turned into a home by the previous owners in the 70s. But despite its age, it's still a very enjoyable place to experience the warmest months. The trailer sits in the middle of a cedar pine forest with a small clearing on the side facing away from the water to park vehicles, as well as a driveway connecting to the road, which is about 110 feet away. The nearest town is roughly a 15-minute drive, and there are no neighbors. I sleep at the opposite end of the trailer, which I call the cabin, as there is an additional dining room and porch built onto the trailer, with their bed at the front end and mine at the very back. There are 2 windows next to where I sleep, with one facing parallel to the lake and the other towards the previously mentioned parking area. Due to the positioning of our cabin in a mountain valley, around 9 p.m. in the summer it gets very dark very quickly. Since we sometimes are outside after this time, there's a bright lamp mounted on the front end of the trailer, which completely illuminates the porch area, facing the lake, and partially lights the parking area, creating an orange glow that can get spooky, especially when raining. I hope the backstory wasn't too long, but it might help you get a sense of the surroundings. Around 11 p.m. one night, I was still awake, sitting in bed and reading. I keep blinds of the window facing away from the lake open, as to provide a little light for reading without having to turn on any inside lamps. The light momentarily gets dimmer, so I glance outside. What I saw was a large, almost glowing white creature which was moving through the semi-lit area, casting a shadow over my window. It had very long and spindly limbs, and I could see contours that looked like emaciated ribs on its side. It was hard to estimate a height because it was moving bent over in what I can only describe as a crawl. Just looking at it instilled so much fear that I couldn't look away, despite how much I wanted to. The creature moved at a fast-walking pace from the front of the cabin and into the tree line. At the time, I wanted to believe that it was some form of very sick, hairless bear, as we frequently saw bears in the area. Looking back, the limbs were just too long to be a bear and too skinny. Also, I would think a bear with mange would still have some hair or discolored skin, but this creature didn't. It appeared entirely to be a white color, and the light from the lamp reflected off its side, making it glow a little. I wish I could provide any form of evidence that what I saw really happened, but ultimately it's the reader's choice, whether to believe me or not. When I have a moment, I'll draw a diagram to detail its movement in relation from where I was looking from. It was a dark and stormy night in Ozark National Park. Ranger Tom had been patrolling the park for hours, making sure that all of the campsites were secure and that there were no wild animals lurking around. As he walked along the trails, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He turned around several times, but there was never anyone there. It was as if someone was playing a trick on him, or worse, as if something malevolent was following him. Suddenly, Tom saw a shadow out of the corner of his eye. He spun around, trying to get a better look at what it was, but it was gone in an instant. He called out, hoping that it was just a fellow ranger or a hiker who was lost, but there was no response. Tom's heart began to race as he realized that whatever it was not human. He could feel the presence of something evil, something otherworldly. He knew he had to get out of there as fast as he could. He began to run, his feet pounding the ground as he tried to escape the unknown terror that was chasing him. He could feel it getting closer and closer and closer, its presence almost suffocating him. Just when he thought he was going to be caught, Tom stumbled and fell to the ground. He looked up, expecting to see the shadow figure standing over him, but it was gone. Breathless and shaken, Tom made his way back to the ranger station. He told his co-workers what had happened, but they didn't believe him. They laughed and told him he was imagining things, that the storm and the dark night had just played tricks on his mind. But Tom knew what he had seen. He knew that there was something sinister lurking in the park, and he vowed to find out what it was. He spent the rest of his career searching for the shadow figure, never giving up hope that one day he would uncover the truth. I've worked as a park ranger for a little under 10 years, most of which I spent working at Yosemite National Park. Honestly, this job is pretty mundane most of the time, the most exciting things being random deer mutilations and teenage party sites. One day, however, I was doing my usual rounds and making sure everyone was out of the public facilities for the night. I was locking up the doors to the bathrooms when I heard what I thought was a little girl whispering. It was ever so faint, and if it wasn't such a still day, I wouldn't have heard it. I sat there for a moment and didn't hear anything further, so I started walking to where my truck was parked to make my way to my next stop. When I heard it again, a faint whisper of a little girl. I stopped and looked around and listened very closely. Yet again, I couldn't hear anything, nor could I see anything. Starting to feel a little creeped out, I quickly made my way to the truck and hopped in. I started the truck up and began to quickly take off when I saw it. A ghostly figure, what I can only describe as an emaciated female. She had long, pale limbs with a rubbery-looking skin. Her eyes were pitch black and her mouth gaped wide open like her jaw was broken. I freaked the hell out and floored it out of there like a bat out of hell. I didn't lock the gate for that area and got some serious. The next day for it, but there was no way in hell I was going to face whatever ghost, demon, monster thing it was. I've never seen or heard anything like that since, and I really hope I never do again. Being a forest ranger isn't always as cool as it sounds. Usually, it's pretty boring and it can get very redundant. But on occasion, we see some pretty spooky things out here in the Okinawa National Forest. The story I'm going to share with you today happened somewhere around the Lake George area recently, and I have been extra vigilant while roaming the woods. We have had several reports of what people thought could be an exotic pet loose. Some people reported seeing a chimpanzee and others a Bigfoot. I had been looking for any sign of chimp or chimpanzees in the area, scouring the ground for droppings, looking through the trees, etc. I honestly thought people were just freaked out by the recent pictures of what some lady alleged was a skunk ape. I felt like it sparked a reaction of hysteria. I personally had never been one to believe much of the Bigfoot stuff, but this day still makes me think twice sometimes. As I was exploring around Lake George, I heard what sounded like a very large branch snapped from high above me. I couldn't quite place where it came from, since the birds were very loud that morning. I tried to shrug it off, but I have this incredible feeling of being watched. I started to walk back towards the way I came, when suddenly the woods went quiet. No birds, no bugs, not even the winds. Just eerie silence. I heard another branch snap, but this time much closer than before. I began to really get nervous because I have never experienced the woods this silent before, not even with bobcats, panthers, or wolves around. I began to walk at a brisk pace to try and not look like fleeing prey, but I get about 200 feet away when I hear a loud wailing, which I can only describe as monkey-like. Suddenly, sticks and rocks are being tossed at me from the tops of the trees, and a whirlwind of noise erupts. I run as fast as I possibly can to get to my vehicle and get the hell out of there. The thing that freaked me out the most, though, is that there was nothing in the trees. They were completely empty. I looked up and it was fall time, so most of the trees were pretty bare. I still have no idea what happened that day, and I just don't really talk about it because I don't want to sound insane. Hello, I'd like to share something that happened to me when I was 9 years old and that I remember really well even now that I am 35. I swear I'm not lying or seeking for attention, but it bothers me that I haven't been able to find a proper explanation until now, so I am asking for your help. I was on holidays with my family at Gabex, a fairly known place on the Adriatic coast in Italy. I am mentioning it because there are several weird legends surrounding this region, like the Valbruna towns, which is known as the Italian Atlantis, since it was apparently submerged by the sea for unknown reasons during Roman times, and fishers and locals claim to have found remnants of columns, temples, and other proof of it, as well as an ancient temple dedicated to Zeus, which was located on the St. Bartolo Mount, which is located just nearby, or miraculous sightings of the Virgin Mary. Also, it's quite an eerie place, because mountains, sea, and towns are all merged together. I was taking a stroll with my father. There were many people surrounding us because it was June and the streets near the seaside were crowded, when I suddenly saw something really weird laying on the pavement. It was animals, a reptile's apparently leg, which had been cut off, but instead of dripping blood, it oozed a clear, slimy fluid. It was dark green, almost black in color, covered in scales, a little lighter underneath, with 3 slender digits, the middle one longer than the others, and every digit sported a curved claw, like a hen's foot. Of course, I got really spooked off, and I instantly tried grabbing my father's attention about my discovery. But he looked really annoyed at me, claiming there was nothing on the pavement. I am absolutely sure he wasn't lying, but at the same time, I'm also really sure about what I saw. Nobody else seemed to notice that horrible paw, so I just walked away. When I got back a couple hours later and checked the same spot, there was nothing. A couple weeks ago, I was with my friend having a sleepover. We're just chilling, talking, watching videos on YouTube at his house. Let me quickly fill you in on his house. It's 2-story, his room on the 2nd floor with a big window facing out towards a little dirt track, and after that, as far as the eye can see, is just fields. This may not be useful to much people, but for any fellow Melburnians. His house is right on the edge of the subdivision in Caroline Springs. Anyway, it's 2 a.m., and we're still chatting when I hear some crashing in the fields. We had the window open for some air. I hear more loud rustling when I then see 2 short figures emerging from the field and onto the gravel track. They were probably around 4'5" and were wearing brown and purple robes, had bald heads and large black eyes. They craned their heads up to our window, and my friend started having a huge panic attack. He passed out. I then looked down to see them start dancing and chanting in strange melancholic voice. It's fair to say I passed out as well out of straight fear. The next morning, his mum found us on the floor and asked us what happened, and we told her everything. She doesn't believe us. I'm pretty sure these are some cryptids performing a ritual, but would love to hear people's thoughts. I grew up in Okinawa, Japan, because I was a military brat. My father and his friends, along with my younger brother and a few of our father's friends' sons, would go fishing deep in the woods. At a secluded fishing hole that only locals would typically know of. So one day, it was almost time to go, and my father instructed me, my younger brother and the other guys, 2 sons, to start toting the extra fishing gear back to the car, which was probably a little less than half a mile away. As we were passing underneath a bridge, we heard a loud crash from above in some nearby trees. All 4 of us looked up to see a creature that I can only describe as resembling a massive mongoose-fox-like looking beast, covered in dark brown hair and roughly the size of a young lion. It had 2 tails that were bushy like a fox. It looked at all of us briefly, then jumped away in leaps and bounds that were not possible by any creature we know of on Earth. It was at that point that I realized that a lot of the Japanese manga, anime, and Pokemon folklore they put on TV isn't completely fiction-based. They are really telling us about cryptids that they have known existed since the beginning of recorded history. I know a lot of people get on these sites and post make-believe stories for likes, but I've never been as terrified and as puzzled as I was by this event. Mind you, 4 people saw it. It was broad daylight, and none of us were old enough to be influenced by any sort of drugs. About 2 or 3 years ago, I was with some friends in my car outside one of my friends' houses. It was around 9 p.m. in winter time, so relatively dark out but clear weather. There were 5 of us in the car, myself and a friend in the passenger seat, as well as 3 friends sitting in the middle row. It's an SUV. We were talking about some random topic when all of a sudden I felt an intense feeling go down my spine, like we were being watched. I turned to my friend in the passenger seat, and he looked up at me at the same time like he had just seen a ghost. I asked him if he felt that too, and he said yes. None of my other friends in the back felt anything. We felt really strange, but ignored it and kept talking. A few minutes later, the feeling came back stronger than before, and once again my friend and I looked at each other at the same time. He looked right past me out the driver's side window, which my back was to, and told me not to turn around. None of my other friends saw anything, but he said there was something out there, and I felt some sort of presence behind me. We took turns describing to each other what we sensed it looked like, and we were for sure both sensing the same thing. It was pure white and humanoid, but the details of what we sensed are fuzzy to me. Clearer descriptions later in the post. After a minute or so, it went away, and we were totally spooked. This is where it gets weirder. My friend and I both felt the presence making circles around the car, and we began to both see green glowing circles moving quickly around it. It's hard to explain, but we couldn't really see them. It was more knowing they were there. They began to move faster and we were freaking the hell out. Then all of a sudden they disappeared. Once again we both felt these, but nobody in the back did. Passenger seat friend and I were leaning back to talk to the middle row when all of a sudden on the sidewalk behind the car there was a flash of white light and a creature sprinting down towards us. It was pure white, bipedal, somewhat humanoid, and very tall and lanky. I'm going to guess it was probably 7 feet tall. It had a horse-shaped head, long black thin hair, black eyes, and claws. My friend and I in the front screamed simultaneously, started the car, and got the hell out of there. Once we were far, far away, we once again took turns describing to each other what we saw, and we were both on point with each other's description. I took everyone home. Then, as I was driving home, I still felt the presence behind me. I couldn't tell if it was in the car or not, but whenever I got to a stop sign light, I felt it catching up, so I sped the rest of the way back. Once I got home, it was gone. Both my friend and I could sense that whatever it was wasn't there to kill us or anything, just to make its presence known. Nothing like it has happened before or since. The only relevant connecting factor between the passenger seat friend and I, that those in the back did not share, is that we were both Christian at the time. Any ideas as to what we could have experienced? I can get in touch with the passenger seat friend if needed for extra info. Thanks, everyone. I have seen hundreds of these things at night in the woods in the rural areas around Memphis, starting around 2020. They are tall, humanoid creatures with blacked-out eyes, and they move slowly and in strange, jerky movements. First time I seen them, I was visiting a veteran friend of mine who was down on his luck about midnight of Thanksgiving Day in 2020. He had been living in a rundown camper vehicle at the edge of the woods on his brother's property. Between his camper and the tree line, there was the remains of an old trailer that had been destroyed by a tornado, with a street light on top of the pole that was used to run electricity to the destroyed mobile home. On the other side of the pole was approximately 15 meters of a field that an old dirt road that split it in half with tall grass and brush at the edge of the far side of the field, after which the tree line started. I thought they were people hiding at first, as they seemed to be grouping more in the darker areas where the light from pole was not as bright. I asked my friend about them, and he shrugged it off and said that they were always there, and they didn't bother him. He also told me that no matter what you did, that you couldn't get close to one. So being a combat veteran with 2 deployments under my belt and my personal firearm from my vehicle, I attempted to approach these things. As I got closer, I noticed that they were solid, white creatures with solid black eye sockets that moved in a jerky but very slow manner. There had to be 50 or more in that field down the dirt road and at the edge of the tree line and beyond. Determined to let something around and find out, I continued to walk towards them, and all of a sudden, they all looked at me with black, empty-looking sockets and instantly caused me to feel more fear than I have ever remember having in my life before. I did not approach them that night. I turned away and got out of the area and took my buddy with me to stay a few days at my place. Since that first time I seen them, I have seen them about a dozen times since, always at night and around wooded areas at all different locations. I have since tried to run and catch them and failed because the creature simply disappeared the moment I closed in within 10 yards and lost direct eye contact for a mere flash. It's like they can phase in or out or something. If you get in close, you can see that the weird jerky moment is parts of them. Arms, legs, head, disappearing and then reappearing in a different position. I think they disappear anytime they move, so they cannot be seen if they walk. I have pumped 45 5.56 caliber incendiary rounds from my R-15 into one without a single shred of evidence of it left behind. These things do make audible noise that can be recorded, but do not show up on video from a cell phone or old analog camcorder with cassette tapes. Animals also see them. However, I have tried to show them to people, and only about half of those I have shown have seen them. I have wondered if I was losing my mind and if anyone else has seen them, and I've tried other experiments with them. I have searched all over the internet and only found a few cryptid creatures that share 1 or 2 similar things to them, but nothing that was close enough for me to be satisfied. The only thing that was really close was the origin of white zombies, sort of. There's been a few people tell me this shape-shifting creature, but they don't change or bleed. They seem to be different sizes, larger, some smaller, and they group up in what I have came to call family clusters, 4 to 5 of them, usually with 2 taller ones and 1 or 2 smaller ones. Around 10-15 years ago, me and a friend were driving down River Road when some winged creature swooped the hood of my car, surrounding and blocking both the windshield and wrapping around to the passenger and driver's side windows, and then disappeared. I can provide more information about the location if someone has a similar experience. As we're driving, I'm telling her this story about this sleep paralysis demon I saw in a dream. It looks like a winged demon made of molten stone with red eyes, trapped behind a stone prison that it escapes and chases me. It's dark out, maybe 10 p.m. And as I'm telling this story as we drive under a large willow tree and something drops out of the sky or tree and swoops the hood of my car, filling my entire windshield, wrapping around to my side windows with wings. My friend screams and I stop the car. I remember it now as an owl with feathery wings, but part of me remembers red eyes, black fleshy wings, and a human face. But I'm not sure if that's just because of what images were already running around in my head when it happened as I was telling the story. There are owls where we were. So I was wondering if maybe that's something owls do, swoop headlights or something. But there are no owls that would be large enough to explain what I saw, just barn owls, and I've seen them before. I thought I'd ask around if anyone else had ever experienced something like this, as it's always bothered me and my friend is sick of me asking her what she remembers. She just says it was weird and she was too scared and closed her eyes. Has anyone else had an owl or large bird swoop their car hood? Is there a cryptid matching this description or something that swoops cars? Anything would help. I'm willing to provide more information if it helps. Thanks. I was rock climbing with 2 other guys in Colorado and was belaying one of them when the 2 of us on the ground heard something weird. The commands we use to communicate that we are safe at the top of a route are name of guy on the ground, off belay, which prompts the belayer to unclip the rope from his belay device so the climber can pull slack out of the rope. The response to that command is name of guy at the top of the route, belay off. The climber was approximately 40 meters up on a 50-meter route. I didn't know this at the time. The rope stopped moving, which isn't uncommon when someone is having a hard time with a move, or is setting up an anchor, which is what I thought was going on. Then we heard it. A voice that sounded way closer to the ground. Like close enough we could have had a shouting conversation. And way further left off route of where the climber should have been. It said Thomas sticks off belay. I looked at the other guy in our climbing party who was just as confused as I was. He said to me what the F was that, and we discussed where the climber should be at this time, and that we shouldn't be able to hear him that well. The rope still wasn't moving, but I decided to keep him on belay. I figured it would be best to keep him safe and just feed slack through my belay device, in the event that it wasn't him. Turns out it wasn't. A few moments later, the rope started moving again. Later followed by a faint syllable counted Thomas sticks off belay that sounded way more like what it should have. We didn't really think anything of it, but we had been traveling down the wall and hit a few routes without seeing anyone. We also had a friend just a few months ago that burned in on a route when someone took him off belay when he wasn't safe. I remember seeing a video of a hiker or a rancher or something, walking down the road when he hears the voice of a woman calling him off the road. The guy stops to try to figure out what's going on, then just gets out of there because of how weird it was. Is there a specific cryptid that mimics the voice of a person? I was on patrol at night in Ozark National Park alongside my colleague, who was also a park ranger. We were chatting as we walked, and he asked me if the gossip about werewolves being real was true. I hesitated for a moment before telling him that yes, it was true. Even though I decided to make my encounter secret, I needed to tell it to someone. So I told him that I'd encountered one before in the park during the afternoon. I started my story. It had been a sunny day, and I had decided to take a walk on one of the park's trails. I heard the rustling of leaves and went to investigate. When I got there, I saw there were wolves devouring a deer. It was a terrifying sight. The creature was huge, covered in shaggy fur and had a face like a snarling animal. I aimed my rifle at it, but it saw me and quickly fled into the woods. So I walked up to the carcass of the deer and saw strange marks all over it. I reported the incident to our supervisor, but he brushed it off and said it was probably just a bear, and to keep my mouth shut about it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. On my next patrol, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, like the werewolf was still out there, somewhere in the woods. I knew deep down that it was real, and it was still out there. My colleague froze. He thought I was joking. I wasn't. As we continued on our patrol, my colleague and I kept our guard up, constantly scanning the woods for any sign of the werewolf. We were both on edge, knowing that we were in the presence of something much more dangerous than any bear. We didn't see any sign of the werewolf that night, but I knew it was only a matter of time before it would attack again. The next day, I alone decided to take a closer look at the marks on the deer's carcass. I noticed that they were not claw marks, as I had initially thought, but more like bite marks. The bites were large, and it was clear that they were made by a creature with a powerful jaw. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was clear that this was no bear, but a werewolf. I went to my supervisor again and showed him the marks on the deer's carcass. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and disbelief. He ordered me to keep quiet about it, and not to talk about it, and not to talk about it to anyone else. He said that it would cause panic in the park and that it would be bad for the park's reputation. I knew that I had to do something to protect the people in the park, but I didn't know what. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started researching werewolves and how to protect myself from them. I learned that silver bullets were the only thing that could kill a werewolf, and that they were vulnerable during a full moon. I decided to take my rifle and go into the woods during the next full moon. I knew it was a dangerous decision, but I had to protect the people in the park. That night I walked into the woods with my rifle loaded with silver bullets. I walked for hours, scanning the woods for any sign of the werewolf. Suddenly, I heard a rustling in the bushes. I aimed my rifle at the source of the noise and shoot. I fired my rifle, and the werewolf let out a howl before falling to the ground. I walked up to the creature and saw that it was dead. But unfortunately, it wasn't a werewolf. It was a bear. About 5 years ago, I was on the run from the police. I had a warrant out for my arrest at that time for some charges that I just didn't want to face. The cops were coming to my mom's house constantly, so I decided to stop going home. Now, my only job at the time was selling drugs. My brother was on the run as well, and him and his girlfriend were living in a tent and made it look easy. So I decided to move into the canyon W them. I was with my girlfriend as well, so it really wasn't too bad, honestly. We had a spot deep in the canyon that was so well hidden, even the ranger didn't find it. I sold my car because the cops were looking for it. We had some extra money, but we had to walk far to the store to get food. When we would go up to the store, we would mingle with some of the other homeless people to network and to make money to survive and support our habits. This is how we ran across Danny. Danny was the first person we met in the area. He introduced us to a lot of the others, which helped us make money we really needed, so we befriended him. One day, Danny found out that his spot had been raided by the park ranger and everything he owned had got thrown out. Well, we felt bad for him, so for some reason I offered to help him. A stranger, by letting him move into an extra tent that I had found recently, right by where we rested our heads every night. Yeah, I wasn't thinking right back then. My brother was the one who was really selling drugs. I was just doing it enough to survive. He had been doing it as basically his profession for years. My brother has done a lot of prison time, and he carried a gun, and we live in San Diego, California, where the gun laws are very strict, so the average person isn't going to be strapped, so maybe that made me feel safer. Either way, like I said, the guy was homeless and seemed harmless. He was a meth addict and would do anything we asked him to do basically for a bowl of meth, so he all thought may come in handy. I walked him down to his new spot and showed him the ropes with getting in and out of the area, where to go to the bathroom, and we showed him what was off limits, like my brother's area and ours. The first week, things went okay. We didn't have any complaints, and my brother was using him to run errands for him, like deliver sacks up to the shops and to buy snacks from 711 at midnight. Basically, all things that required walking far distances. In fact, he became the official camp bitch. But he didn't mind because he had all the meth he could dream of, which I realize now is what probably caused the issue we were about to face. So one morning, we get a visit from our fellow homeless neighbors, who we hardly knew. They came by my brother's tent early and asked him some questions. When they left, I asked him what they said, and he said that mostly they were asking about me. They were basically wondering if I was a thief because they thought they heard somebody wandering around their tent the night before. My brother said that he assured them that we were not that sort of people, and that although we were homeless, we had plenty of money and were not going out looking to basically shit where we eat. When my brother told us about what the neighbors said, it definitely crossed all our minds that it could have been Danny. So we reminded him not to go near the neighbor's area, just in case he had accidentally walked over there. He said, of course, and that he wasn't a thief and he wouldn't disrespect us that way. Well, fast forward another week and strange things were happening throughout the week. For example, one day somebody dropped a bag full of lotions and lubes on the path to our spot, which definitely set off some alarms, because nobody goes in the canyon that way besides us. Again, our spot was very secluded, which is why we picked it, and also I could tell somebody had been around the bushes near our tent, because a lot of them were smashed in like somebody had been standing on them. On to you again. We asked Danny about both situations, and he denied both. Then the next morning the neighbors came back, and they were very upset this time. They said that somebody was definitely outside their tent again that night, and not only were they in their area, but they were watching them while they were being intimate. And no offense to them, but they are not the most attractive couple. I honestly could not imagine how someone could do such a thing. We told them we would have our eyes peeled, and we were noticing prints by our tent as well. Obviously, all signs pointed to Danny again. So immediately I went to his tent to go talk to him, but he wasn't there. We waited, and even by night he still wasn't back. That made us even more suspicious, especially because my brother had a lot of work for him that he had already paid him to do, and my brother isn't the guy you want to break a promise to. Well, it got dark, and eventually me and my girl went to sleep. In the middle of the night, she got up and went out to use the bathroom. Then about 30 seconds later, I hear her yelling, So I run outside my tent, and I ask her what is the matter. She said she saw Danny. He was hiding in the bush and watching her pee. She almost peed all over herself, trying to pull her pants up. I was furious. I immediately went to find him. I saw him running away from a distance, so I ran back to my tent and grabbed my pellet gun and ran back after him. I chased him around the canyon for about an hour. I kept hearing him, but couldn't see him. I would chase him, and then I would hear his footsteps stop, and I would look around with my flashlight, and then, after a few minutes, I would hear running off in another direction and chase him again. Finally, I lost him at one point, which is when I decided to go to his tent. I opened it up, and there he was. He was laying in it, breathing heavily, but pretending to sleep. I told him, "You're lucky my brother is asleep. But I promise you, if you're not out when I get up in the morning, you're going to deal with him." He swore he was innocent, but I wasn't hearing any of it. The next morning, I immediately went back to his tent, and he was still there. I told him to leave in 5 minutes, or my brother would be back there to make him move. So about an hour later, I see that he hasn't packed anything. So I get my brother, and my brother brings his Magnum revolver. My brother walks up, unzips his tent, and put his gun directly in his face. Danny looks like he's going to cry. I said, "Get up, Danny." He gets up and he starts begging, "Please don't shoot me. Just let me get my stuff." But my brother says, "Nope. You had a chance to get your stuff and leave, but now you're just leaving." He asks my brother, "What about the tent?" He says, "That is not your tent. It could have been if you would have listened and left peacefully. But now it's my tent." My brother then yells, "Go now," and he shoots a shot off in the air. Danny screamed and ran for his life. Me and my brother packed up his stuff and gave it to another homeless guy under the condition he didn't stay anywhere near our area. We saw Danny a few more times here and there at the shops, but he wouldn't acknowledge us, just as we instructed him to do. Later that year, me and my brother ended up getting arrested and finishing our time. We both got off of drugs as well. We're going on 3 years clean now, and we both changed our lives around and haven't had to live in a tent again. Also, me and my girl are still together to this day. That experience, along with going to jail, has humbled all of us a lot, and we don't take for granted what we have. We're all very open-minded and don't ever judge homeless people, and try to help them whenever possible. I live in a small town in a rural area where there's not much to do but drive around. Last fall, around 1-2 a.m., 2 friends and I were driving around aimlessly our country roads, equipped with slushies in hand from the only gas station that was still open, just as we've done thousands of times before. This time, we turned onto a particularly desolate country road, one that we typically seem to subconsciously avoid for whatever reason. We didn't notice we were on it at first. We were too busy talking about college and boys and whatever else was on our minds when my friend slammed on her brakes. A deer, a buck, to be exact, trotted across the road. Innocent enough, right? That's what we all thought, or rather convinced ourselves as we sat in silence as we continued to drive. As soon as we got to a more familiar road, I let out a stifled laugh. I looked at my 2 friends and said, "I think I'm going crazy because I literally thought that was a man running on all 4s at first." I watched their faces fall. It turns out all three of us could have sworn that we'd seen a man running on all fours across the street. But that doesn't make sense. It was clearly a deer. We all saw it on the other side of the road. We know it was a deer. So why did we all think the same very specific thing? I didn't think much of it until last night, when I woke up in the middle of the night to see a deer standing in front of my suburban house, looking into my window, pretty far from any forests or fields. Obviously, deer are common, and it's not rare for deer to wander out this way, but it reminded me of the incident from last fall. Has anyone else had a similar experience? Again, I could totally just be overreacting. It took moving 1,000 miles away to finally feel comfortable enough to tell you this story. This happened just before my senior year of high school, over a period of 3 weeks in the summer. I was 17 years old, drug-free and sober. At the most, I took Advil for headaches every now and again. I just want to assure you I was not on any mind-altering substances or long-term medication that could affect my cognitive ability. During the summer, my curfew was 11 p.m., and this occurred while driving home from my, at that time, boyfriend's house, which took roughly 15 minutes, so let's say about 10:45 at night. I was full of energy at this age, and a night owl, so I was not even remotely tired. In fact, I was hyped up with the warm summer nighttime breeze, car windows down, and singing along to the radio. I took a shortcut through back roads to avoid going into the tiny city with its jerk cops. Also, one of the roads I took was super straight and flat, so I could really speed, and that feels great when you're a teenager. But right before that road, I had to take 2 very close turns to get onto it. First, I'd take a right turn that was more than 90 degrees almost back the way I had came. Then, in exactly half a mile, I would turn left onto the long straight road where I could really put the gas pedal down. Since it was only half a mile, I normally didn't speed up that much because the small stretch of road was more like packed gravel, and it would be a waste, as I would have to slow down again to turn left onto the much better road where I could let loose. The tiny property on the inside corner of the left turn is where all this went down. A house had recently been built there, 2 stories with a detached garage, and it seemed odd how quickly it had been erected as we built our family house, and it took us a year to finish it. I will start at the beginning, because I believe this is all related. Week 1. I am positively jamming to my music. The wind whipping through my car feels great, and I'm relaxed in my very familiar drive home. I slow down to make my right turn onto the rough rural road, just be bopping along when my lights illuminate something stunning sitting on the corner of the road. It's a wolf, a real wolf. A solid white, real wolf. I know the difference in my dog breeds and a wolf. I love watching dog competitions, wildlife documentaries, and have even met a 1/4 wolf in person. They look different from domestic dogs. This was a wolf, and it was amazing and blowing my mind. I slow down even more while I turn down my music. I'm getting close to it, and I notice that it's not minding me at all. It is sitting perfectly still on the corner of the road, staring at the house. Almost unblinking, its ears didn't even flick towards me. All its attention was focused on this house. I was so close, I could have reached out my window and brushed the fur on the back of its head. I was smiling and amazed, but my mind was already churning. It made no sense for a wolf to be behaving like that, even less for there to be a white wolf in rural North Alabama in the summer. I came to a complete stop behind it, marveling at its fur and presence. I felt euphoric, like I had seen something rare and blessed. My mind made a jump to the local Indian stories of animal spirit guardians, and I started to wonder. I couldn't stay, though. Mom would never believe me if I told her I was late because of a spirit wolf. With a sigh, I said goodbye to the wolf and drove home in a better mood than ever. I got to see something special, and it filled me with emotions of joy and peace. Week 2. I was driving home again, and I had been taking extra care to keep an eye out for my wolfy buddy, hoping to see him again around that area, so I drove extra slow with my window down and radio off. That was a horrible mistake. I should have realized what the presence of a guardian meant. It meant danger. Alas, I was on the short road approaching the new little house. Then I saw the thing that to this very day makes me question my sanity, my reality, and possibility of eldritch terrors, as Lovecraft described. It was crouched right before their mailbox, its limbs folded and pulled in tight with its hunched posture, yet its head was still taller than the box. It was mottled green and black with undertones of blue, and it looked wet and slimy all over. Its head was elongated, allowing for an extended maw full of razor-sharp teeth. The upper half of its body looked emaciated, with barely more than frog-like thin skin pulled over angular long bones, ropey muscles to hold it upright, and at the end of its grossly stretched arms were equally terrible long fingers, while its legs had bulk to them and looked equipped for running, with back-facing knees for sprinting, and tipped-in raptor-like curved claws. It looked tall, maybe 7 foot, maybe more, just folded up into this predator's posture, waiting for prey. Then there were its eyes, solid black and sunken. I still want to vomit thinking about its eyes looking at me. Then I realized, it's going to look at me, and it's going to see me, and there is no avoiding it. Panic, terror unique to this alien thing swallowed me instantly, feeling like I was tilting off the world I had always known and into an abyss where monsters like this exist. I couldn't breathe, but I had to get my window up. I had to get my window up, or I'd be ripped by those teeth and torn with those claws. Blood would adorn the cabin of my car, and I would become an unsolved mystery. I had a manual crank window. F me. I had a crank window because I was scared of crashing into water and not being able to get out of my car, but now I realized that there were far worse things in the world than crashing into water. Its head was turning towards me, and I had let off the gas, but I was still getting closer to it. It made me want to scream, but I had to get my window up first, and I was cranking it as hard as I could. I was starting to cry as I finally got the window closed, and then I put my gas pedal to the floor. Gravel road, be damned. I thought I must not look at it as I pass. I must not look at it or make direct eye contact. I just shouldn't. It's not good to connect with these things. I've already seen too much. My tires had found grip, and I started to launch forward, passing it. In my peripheral vision, I could see it starting to unfold its limbs, and it sent a terrible chill down my spine. I'm screwed. I'm really screwed. I was mumbling through my tears as I slid around the turn, fishtailing for a moment before I rocketed down the road. I felt sick. My heart was hammering. I had snot and tears rolling down my face, and my hands were shaking. I glanced in my rearview mirror and could only see darkness as there were no street lamps out there. I used a trick I've mentioned in one of my other stories to tap my brakes soft enough. The light comes on, but I don't actually slow down. Red lit up the dust that was billowing up in my wake, but amidst the swirling chaos I thought I saw a darker shadow than the rest. A tall, thin shadow. I had enough and decided I was going to drive straight to the lighted roads and not let off the gas again the rest of the way. No more looking back. I was going to drive 109 miles per hour, which is as fast as I can go before my governor kicks in. I even ran a stop sign at the end of the road because I was not going to get caught by this thing if I could help it. I took a right onto the highway and flew home. I might have even been relieved to get pulled over, but I did not. When I got home, no one was awake. I was pretty trusted to come home on time. So I called my boyfriend and cried to him for a long time before I was able to explain. He was dismissive and thought I was pulling a joke on him. Then he thought I was just being crazy and seeing things. There's many reasons we didn't stay together, but his insensitivity contributed. Week 3. I refused to take my shortcut anymore. For that reason, I would have to leave my boyfriend's house a bit early, and he'd been making fun of me about it all week. One of the days we went to a park to walk around, and on the way back, he decided he wanted to drive by the house where I saw that thing. I was hysterical, begging him not to drive there, but he would not be dissuaded, so as we got closer, and I could not stop him, I leaned my passenger side seat all the way back and pulled myself down, cowering in panic of getting near the place. I hid below the window and covered my eyes while panting heavily, reliving the traumatic night in my mind again. At one point he stopped the car. "Spooky. You have to see this," he said. "No," I whined, resisting him pulling at my arm. "No. You really have to see this. Look," he said in a changed tone of astonishment. Tears in my eyes, I uncurled and slowly peeked over the rim of the window. The house was gone, burnt clear down to the foundation, with only a handful of framing beams still standing. The ground around the house was blackened in a perfect large circle. My boyfriend started to get out of the car. I shouted, "No, let's get out of here," while I grabbed for his arm, but he easily avoided me and got out. He walked around the ashy piles of the ruins for a bit, using a stick to poke at this and that. When he finally came back, he had an intense look of thinking on his face. There was no evidence of any personal belongings, furniture, power wiring, or even interior walls. "It doesn't seem like other burnt-out houses. Something's weird." When we got to his house, he searched for news articles about any house fires in the area. There weren't any. He called the closest fire station and was quickly brushed off by the person that answered, as they didn't know about a fire there and didn't have time to find out before quickly hanging up on him. I never wanted to see that place again. I went out of my way to avoid the roads in that area. Talking about it still makes my chest tighten, my skin crawl, and my eyes water. My brain still has trouble because I know I saw it. A thing that is nothing like any creature known to humans. Yet still I saw it. If you've heard of something that matches its description, let me know. I live in a house practically in the national forest, and have always been freaked out. My mom had already went to bed, and I was alone. It was about 11 o'clock. I was just sitting. doing nothing really, and I heard a high-pitched howl-like scream off in the distance. Let's just say I freaked out a wee bit. This went on for 5, maybe 10 minutes. I tried to wake my mom up because not only was I scared, but I wanted a witness that she wouldn't wake up. The screams continued, and I just tried to ignore it. It was about 8:30 p.m. While taking out the trash at work with a coworker/roommate, a large dog approached us. It seemed to be galloping. It wasn't walking normally like an animal should. Despite the many surrounding lights, the dog appeared to be entirely black. It was silhouetted just enough that you could see its muscle definition. I could see a slight reflection in its eyes. It seemed to lack a shadow. My roommate and I both expressed having different experiences and visions of the dog. When I initially saw the dog, I interacted saying, "Aw, dog," in excitement. For me, it proceeded to sit entirely still on the cement, staring like a statue. What I saw was a large, fluffy, black dog, lazy ears, similar to a Newfoundland dog. My roommate expresses seeing the dog as a large, very muscular, aggressive-looking black dog that stood rigid the entire time, staring like it wanted to attack. It was short-haired, muscled, and had pointed ears. I jokingly stated that the dog looked like a skinwalker, not really anticipating that anything would happen. Then we immediately felt a wake of dread fall over us. Something was wrong. We both saw the dog's jaw open, almost as if it was about to bark. We heard a distant yet extremely clear, high-pitched "come here." The dog immediately turned to take off. We turned around the corner. The creature was unreasonably far up the road for the short amount of time that it was not being observed. It was wobbling, crossing its paws, walking oddly. When it turned left around a corner, it seemed to nearly stand up on its hind paws, walking on 2 legs just before passing around out of sight. The rest of the night was just as interesting. We had trouble with certain objects slightly moving place, nudging a bit, settling. It quickly became more aggressive. But then, just as we were about to leave, we heard a loud and persistent knocking coming from the front of the store. We quickly went to our cars. On the drive home, I tried to blast music and ignore what I had just seen. I heard whispering coming from my back seat. I couldn't quite make out any words. It just sounded like whistling almost. But get this, I saw a random antique clawfoot bathtub on the left side of the road, in a field. It was certainly not there the day before, or even that morning on my drive there. The kicker, I was watching the sidelines of the roads for animals, and I most certainly saw a buck. He was leaping out in front of the road, a good 50 feet ahead. I slammed on my brakes, but when I got closer, it was merely a bush. Perhaps I was just paranoid, but this is all very concerning. A friend and I were scouting for elk. It was getting dark, so we started headed down the mountain. We were in 2 different pickups. My partner was ahead of me about 10 seconds. We were on the last turn headed down to the main line approximately 3 miles away. I noticed ahead of me my partner was turning around and started to come my way. Then he stopped and started looking the other way. By then it was dark, and it had been raining. I noticed something about 70 yards away on the side of the road. It looked like the back end of a large object or a car. We had our headlights right on the object. Then I could tell it wasn't a car or pickup because there was no reflection or anything like that. We sat there approximately 30 seconds, watching. At first the thought was someone was broke down. Then my partner had enough and started to leave down the mountain toward the main line. Then all of a sudden the object started running away around the bend. I had a great view where I was parked. All I saw was something roughly 6-7 feet tall, running so fast. I saw long arms swinging back and forth, and its stride was impressive. It was like a track star running with their arms swinging how they do. When I first seen this object, it was a light gray color. Then when it started running, it was a light brownish in color, real light. Didn't get to see any parts of face. After that, I caught up with my partner and asked what in hell was that. He replied that he seen it walking down the side of the road 40 yards away from him. It turned away and started running very fast. He described to me the long arms and its stride it had. I told him when he drove off it started running away, and I also seen its long arms and stride. We went back up there the next day to look for tracks, but it had been raining for some while. I was a believer when I was a little kid, but once I got older, I didn't believe in it at all. Now at 33 years old, I know what I seen, and there is Bigfoot out there. Me and my buddy were out looking place to gold pan. We just took off panning every creek we came to. We were driving down this road, and I saw 2 tracks in the snow in the middle of the road. I hunt deer, elk, bear, cats. These were 2 tracks that were big. I told my buddy something's not right, so we went down the road further and ran out of road. We went to turn around and heard sticks breaking and heard a loud walking just above us in the thick brush. My buddy got out to see if we could turn the truck around and get the hell out of there, and a growl came from our right by the side by the creek. The smell was like rotten trash. Bear and elk don't smell like that. So we laughed. I was a passenger in my sister's car driving on Highway 22 about 4 p.m. I looked over the left where there is a hill that's been cleared for power lines and saw what I first thought was a large man come running out of the trees across the clearing. Then I realized he was completely covered in hair. I yelled to my sister to look. The man-like creature was over 7 feet tall and very muscular-looking. He crossed the clearing in about 4 seconds-long strides. My sister thought it was a man at first and then a bear, and then realized it couldn't have been either. It ran upright the whole way, and its arms were swinging at its sides, and it had very broad shoulders. My first impression was that it was very powerful and that it was trying to get across the clearing as quick as possible. We stopped the car and waited to see if it came back out, but it didn't. I would have gone up to look for footprints, but I have bad knees and my sister was scared. It was broad daylight, so I know what I saw. My sister and I have both lived in Alaska and have both seen bears, so we know that's not what it was. I have never seen this before.
I'm not sure what it was, or if it even was anything, but it's stuck in my mind to this day. I should start by saying I'm typically very skeptical. Though so interested in the stories on this Reddit page, I doubt myself and my experiences massively. There is, however, one thing that happened to me a few years ago that I've always found odd. I don't know what it was, and to be honest, it's probably really easily explained, but it has stayed with me all this time. I didn't actually see anything. I only heard it. I was walking my dog in a wood near my house, UK, and had never had anything odd happen before this. It was a little trail with bushes and trees either side. I was walking through a specific section when I heard the strangest sound. The best I can describe it is sort of like the real deep purr that big cats make, the sounds of tigers and lions. It was far, far too deep and guttural to be a regular cat. My dog also got very scared. She jumped into my arms and had to be carried until we had left the area with the sound, perhaps only about 5 meters or so. What made it even more odd at the time was that it didn't seem to be coming from a particular direction. It was all around. I couldn't pinpoint it at all or see anything in the bushes. I've listened to the sounds of all sorts of animals that it could have been and can't for the life of me find something similar. Again, I'm not saying it was even anything creepy, but I don't know what it was. I've never heard it again and hadn't really ever heard that sound before it either, not in person anyway. Any theories? Probably something so simple, but still, thank you. My pager went off, indicating that I had an alarm call back for work. Me and the wife was arguing, which was unusual. I decided to walk to my work site, which normally takes 15 miles to get there. I live on East Spur. I got onto West Spur and started to walk down to the stop sign. I could hear what I thought sounded like a coyote. I got further down, closer and closer to the stop sign of West Spur, which is maybe 100 yards, and I looked to my right. Typically, the neighbor dog is biting at my ankles and barking ferociously. Well, they were under the wheelchair ramp, all 4 of them. Then I got really scared and all the hair on my body stood up and I stopped dead in my tracks and noticed it was extremely quiet out that night. That's when I heard plainly, like a very huge man screaming in a distance, like it was 3 or 4 miles out. And then it louder and the scream got louder. Then the other thing was screaming back at it, which was less than a mile away from me. Then I realized it was a Sasquatch or Bigfoot. I turned around and ran for my house, which was about 100 yards maybe. I got inside and tried to wake the wife up, but she would not wake, so I got into our Explorer and turned onto West Spur off of East Spur, found my work keys in one spot, my lighter further down the road, my hat was laying out there, my cigs were laying further down the road and by the stop sign was my cell phone. Even my wallet was lying out there. I had left a trail back to my place of all my belongings that was on me. I was scared shitless. I didn't feel my hat come off. I forgot I was wearing a hat until I come across all my items in the middle of the road, scattered. All these items were in my jacket pocket and my jeans. I found a tribal cop, Jason Scholl, patrol officer back then, and I told him what had happened, what I heard. He went and parked at the end of the Grelliot Heights Road and sat and listened. He said he didn't hear anything, and he sat there off and on throughout his graveyard shift. Jason is a skeptic. He don't believe unless it happened to him or he saw it himself. I was scared, and I don't scare too easily. I live on the Warm Springs Indian Reservation. Others have told me that it's impossible that that type of Sasquatch was in the area, and that type of Bigfoot or Squatch is not found in this area. That's BS. I will never forget that night. This incident occurred in Memphis, Tennessee. I started my career as a Memphis police officer a few years previously in the 1980s. I was on a special assignment at the time. It was 2 a.m., and it was a clear summer night, but quite humid. I was in my personal vehicle with the top down and the radio playing. I was still in my uniform, including my bulletproof vest and a gun belt with all the regular equipment attached to it. I was heading south on Covington Pike at a good rate of speed and was the only one on the road. This part of the road connects the Raleigh-Bartlett area to the Bear Clare area. The road is slightly elevated as the surrounding area is low, and running through it is the Wolf River, which is a few miles from here, and connects to the Mississippi River. This area is commonly referred to by the locals as the Wolf River Bottoms these days. As I was driving, in my peripheral vision over to my right, just outside my headlight beams, I noticed something was moving fast directly toward the front of my car. I immediately slammed on the brakes, thinking that a deer was running across the road. But I couldn't have been more wrong. It came to a screeching halt right in the middle of the road, right in front of my headlights, not more than 7 feet from my bumper, as we both froze in place staring at each other for several seconds. It appeared to be 3 to 4 feet tall, but was also crouched. It could have been closer to 5 if it stood straight up, but I got the impression that its current body posture was its normal way of standing. It had a large head, at least compared to its skinny, slender body. It appeared to be dark gray and greenish in color, similar to the color of an alligator, but the appearance of its skin looked like a similar texture to a human's. It had dark, large, oval eyes on each side of the upper part of its face, running slanted from the top portion of its head to about the midsection of its head. It was kind of pointing inward to where you would expect a nose to be. However, from what I could tell, there was no distinct nose, at least none like a human. Below the eyes was a very thin, dark, almost black line which I assumed was its mouth. It ran from about the same location a human's mouth would be. However, the line ran straight across the lower face in front and then turned upward and slightly back on the head. It had no ears that could see. Its body and chest area were rounded like a human but vastly smaller, almost like a child's. Its arms appeared to be longer and somewhat disproportionate to its body, and they were skinny and had an insect-pipe look to them. I could make out hands, but they were also completely folded at the wrist joint. The legs were long because, even with this thing's shortness, I could make out the top of them even with it so close to the bumper which was obscuring the bottom half somewhat. They were like the arms, thin and insect-like, but appeared to be jointed. I did notice its chest area moving slightly like it was breathing, but it seemed slow and steady. I never noticed anything like genitalia. There was no hair any place that I could see, and I'm not even sure if it was wearing any type of clothing. If it was, it would have had to be skin-tight. I never noticed a tail at any point. My adrenaline was pumping, and it was only a brief period of observation. It again took off like a shot, and it was out of my headlights. I could still make out its outline in the darkness, and it was moving like a sprinter. It leaped over the guardrail onto the other side of the road and down the embankment. I will admit that this was not the only bizarre incident that I had during my career, but it definitely was the strangest. I never told anyone on the force about the encounter. In fact, I only mentioned it to a close friend during these many years. I can only identify it as a lizard man or an unknown humanoid. I would have never believed it unless I actually witnessed it. This happened a few years back. We're close with our next-door neighbors, and they were getting their kitchen remodeled. My mom was over at their house chatting with them. I decided that I wanted to go over and see the kitchen too, so I head out my front door. It's a straight line from my front door to the neighbor's front door. Looking to my right was the main road and the houses across it. Our driveway is a connected double driveway with a small extension by the edge for extra cars to park. By the road, near that is a street lamp. The neighbors 2 doors down from us, one across from our neighbors, run a small home caring for mentally challenged people. By their driveway under the street lamp was a small black car parked under it, front-facing towards the street lamp. The lamp illuminated a small squirrel-like creature under it. I love animals of all types, so naturally I slowed my pace to look at the small squirrel. Suddenly it stood up in its hind legs and morphed into a small figure similar to a kid. It ducked behind the small car, and I didn't see it again. My memory from there is very foggy. I can barely remember what happened. It could very well have been the shadow of a squirrel, or just my imagination, but I'm sure I saw something that day. A few months ago, my sibling was visiting their partner for a small party, and they said they had seen a figure in the street. I grew up Mormon and served my mission on the Navajo and Hopi reservations. I experienced a lot of things that I still can't explain, but there is one that stands out. I was living in Chinle, Arizona, which is close to the border of the Hopi and Navajo reservations. We were visiting a family out near Many Farms, Arizona, and left at about 9:30 p.m. All of the roads in that area are dirt roads. We had just pulled out of the driveway, and we saw a man standing in the field on the other side of the road. He was a younger-looking Native American man, probably in his 30s. It's hard to describe what we felt. I guess it was just a feeling of dread. He was just standing there and staring at us. I was driving and my companion and I both came to the conclusion that we needed to get the hell out of there. The roads are rough on the res, but we were used to driving fast on them. It is actually smoother the faster you go, so we took off pretty quickly. The man in the field started running next to our truck and staring into the passenger side window. I kept accelerating and the man kept pace with us. We were going 50 miles an hour when he fell out of our view. We were too scared to look back to see what happened. I kept speeding up until we were going as fast as I could safely drive on those roads. The next morning we called the main office for our mission and spoke with the mission president. After we told him our story, he said that it has happened to other missionaries before. He told us to try not to think about it or talk about it with others because it could attract them to us. We just tried to forget about it, but also did not venture into the deeper res at night. I have a story. It isn't mine, but it happened to my uncle. He used to tell this story when we went camping, and it scared the lights out of me every time I heard it. We live in Utah and my uncle, Mark, went on a mission at 19. They sent him to an Indian reservation in Arizona. They paired him up with a companion named Carl. When they first got there, there was a huge rift with the locals on the reservation with them being there. They didn't want my uncle and Carl staying on the reservation grounds. Eventually, they came to a compromise that they would stay on the outskirts in a trailer. This reservation wasn't very big and was located next to a heavily wooded area. The first night, they were trying to sleep when all of a sudden their trailer started to shake violently back and forth. Startled and not sure what was happening, they climbed under their table for cover. Mark could distinctly hear someone pushing it from both sides of the trailer like a group of people. After about 5 minutes, it stopped. That next day, they made rounds on the reservation and were talking to the locals. Carl made a comment to one of the families that their trailer was shaking that night before. The family got very quiet and then told them they had to leave. They thought it was strange, but didn't think much of it. The next night, it happened again. They awoke to their trailer shaking back and forth. Again, they climbed under the table until it stopped. This went on for 2 more nights. Anytime they tried to talk to anyone about it, they got quiet and told them to leave. Mark started thinking that, due to the tension of their arrival, the locals were doing this to scare them off the reservation. They then go into a convenience store and they were talking together about how frustrated they were with the situation. The clerk overheard and said, "They can't talk about it. It's forbidden." Confused, they ask him, "Can't talk about what?" The guy continues to tell them about the skinwalkers. He says they are evil demons that were once Native American witches. If they talk about it, the skinwalkers will come for their souls. They just walked out of there baffled. They thought it was another scare tactic. So that night, when the shaking started again, my uncle decided to be brave and confront them. He went to the trailer door, flew it open, and yelled, "Hey!" When he did that, he saw these 3 animals run off. 2 were a wolf. 1 was a bear, but they looked strange, almost with human features. As he watched them run towards the trees, all 3 stood up on 2 legs and walked slowly towards the trees, making a human cackling laugh. It scared him so bad that they called their mission president that next morning and asked to be moved. They were relocated that day. For a year, nothing happened. One day, they announced that Carl was being relocated to another city and Mark was getting a new companion, Jimmy. They had to drive for about an hour to pick Jimmy up from the airport. The road they traveled went through the boundaries of the reservation. They arrived at about 8 p.m. and met Jimmy, and they go to leave. The mission president tells Jimmy, "We are driving through a dangerous area at night, so we can't make any stops. If you need to use the restroom, you need to go now." Jimmy says, "I am fine." The mission president gets serious enough to even freak out Mark. "I am not kidding. Go do your business." Jimmy was insistent he was fine, so they hit the road. As they were about 30 minutes into the drive, they were going through the area of the reservation boundaries. Jimmy starts complaining that he needed to pee badly. The mission president says, "We can't stop here. You'll have to hold it." Jimmy keeps going on, "I really can't hold it." So the mission president stops the car and says, "Okay, but you will do your business next to the door, and if I say get into the car, you better get into the car fast." With a look of confusion, Jimmy says, "All right," opens the door and starts to do his business. About 5 seconds later, the mission president says nothing and just yanks Jimmy into the car and floors it. Jimmy and Mark start freaking out. What is going on? The mission president says nothing and just increases his speed. All of a sudden, Mark sees something next to the car to his right. A giant wolf-looking man was running on 2 feet next to the car. Mark looked at the speedometer. They were going over 60 miles an hour and still increasing. The wolf creature kept right next to the car for 10 minutes until it finally took off into the trees. Shaking, Jimmy gets out of the car when they arrive. They didn't speak through the whole ordeal, and says, "What did I just see?" The mission president says, "Next time I tell you to take care of your business, you take care of your business." I live in Bend. My kids and I were on our way home after visiting family in the Clackamas for Christmas. We were going east on Highway 26 at about 8 p.m. We had just passed government camp when my daughter and I saw a large, dark figure run from right to left across the highway. I ran into a dent in the snowbank that we thought was a road. The figure was bulky and almost as tall as the snowbank. When it ran across, I saw that its arms were long and it looked like its head was slightly pointed and it leaned forward a little as it ran. I didn't think to count how many strides it took, but the strides were large. It looked like its head and upper body didn't move as it was running. It looked like it was jogging, but got across the road quickly. When we passed the road, it was only plowed for about 20 feet, and the rest was covered with snow. The drifts were all about the same height on the 3 sides. The figure was no longer there, and it had only been about 3 seconds. It was then that we realized how tall the snow was. I was driving a 4-wheel drive pickup that I later measured at 6 1/2 feet tall, and the snow was at least 2 feet taller than my truck. We thought it was a person. Our eyes were playing tricks on us until we saw how tall it was and how fast it had disappeared. I don't see how it could have been a person considering its height and speed and the way it ran. And what would anyone be doing running across the road and scrambling up a snowdrift in the middle of the night 2 days after Christmas? We were the only ones on the road at the time, so they would have had to wait a long time for us to go by. We were enjoying a nice evening of camping, sitting by a campfire which we built too early in the afternoon. I heard a large, moving, crashing sound from the woods above us, and when I turned, I saw what I first thought was a person, then thought was a bear, then thought was a person, and then again thought was a bear.
It was around 30 feet uphill from us and through relatively dense forest.
I dismissed it as a bear, and my partner soon started feeling creepy and said she felt like we were being watched. We enjoyed the rest of our evening, played some cards, and soon fell asleep. Around 3 in the morning, I awoke to a shaking earth, deep groaning, screaming sounds, and that moving, crashing sound from earlier coming straight down at our tent. I reached over for the can of pepper spray we bring along, just in case, thinking this creature would be on top of us any second. The moment I grabbed it, the creature stopped and reversed direction abruptly and violently, tearing and breaking plants and just making a racket for a long while as it descended deeper into the forest, all the while making deep, spine-chilling, groaning, screaming sounds that echoed down the valley. Walls. I did not fall back asleep for some time, and when we woke up, our large duffel bag of food, weighing probably 40-50 pounds, had completely vanished. No trace of it anywhere. Wouldn't a bear just tear it open? To note, all of the experience in the middle of the night was in pitch black. The only sighting was earlier in the day. I was driving to work, and this creature, about 8 feet tall, ran from the creek to the road, crossed it in front of me, and vanished into the woods. Scared the crap out of me. It was big and reddish-brown and fast. I contacted a local guy here who is into this stuff, which I never thought to be real until now. I showed him the area. He walked around a while and then pointed out 3 very nice footprints, which he took pictures of and made plaster casts out of 2 of them. I didn't tell him about it for a few days, and he even noted to me that the tracks were not fresh. I know is that this thing was very big and was very fast, and it had to be strong in order to go into the woods and just vanish. That was a steep hill. My boyfriend and I were camping on my family's 120-acre hunting land in the backwoods of northern Wisconsin. We just laid down in our tent. It's about 10 p.m. at night, fully dark outside. We hear a noise that sounds like someone or something is trying to imitate a dog barking. It had almost a mechanical and very timed-out sound to it. It moved past our tent and onto a nearby farm where actual dogs started going nuts and barking at whatever it was. That was when we really noticed how off the barking sound was. Whatever it was sounded extremely large as it moved through the cornfield next to our tent. We never saw anything. We heard it possibly kill a fawn while it was in the field by us. Any ideas as to what it could be? I've just done a few internet searches but found nothing. I'm wondering if anyone knows about this creature, a normal-looking spider that has the ability to transform into a rock. I've seen this twice now in the past year already, and it's quite mind-blowing and also kind of scary. The rock form was shaped very strange, very oblong and asymmetrical, but smooth, almost an oval but with a little offshoot that seemed weird for a rock. Is this even an established cryptid? It has to be. I can't be the first to witness this. The first time I saw it, I was in such shock, I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, or somehow I misunderstood what happened. It was very quick. The second one was undeniable. I saw a spider crawling towards me on a cement sidewalk, and it stopped, and then instantaneously becomes a rock, as I described before. I stared at it for some time, told a few people who laughed at me, and never will I forget having seen that. I live in apartments with a cemetery right behind them, so it's not uncommon to have experiences like this. However, I'm not sure if this is a spirit or if these experiences are connected. A few nights ago, me and my friend were walking back from the store, 10:30 p.m. We both heard a little girl screaming stuff such as "Mommy, help," and saw a man chasing something into the woods. We called the police, but they didn't help, just looked around a bit and told us to call back if we hear or see anything. Me and my friend decided to search ourselves as we kept hearing the cries in the woods. After a while, we went to the spot we were when we first heard it. We heard it again coming from the trails. We look, stupid idea, I know, and saw what looked like a tall, skinny person crouched down. Its skin was gray and looked like it was stretched across the bones. It looked up, but I couldn't see much because our lights weren't bright enough. I heard a cracking sound and smelled that clay you can find by digging. Once I heard the noise, the rain got really heavy and the wind almost knocked me off. I'm on the heavier side, so that wouldn't be easy. Ever since seeing it, we have both been really tired, almost like the energy was suddenly sucked out of us. We both felt sick and ran, but earlier at around 6 p.m. It gets dark at 5 p.m. Here, I was walking back from the same store. As I was walking past the spot we saw it, I heard my best friend. He lives 2 hours away, so I was kind of shocked at first. He was yelling for me to wait for him. I saw him standing there, but it wasn't exactly him. He has glasses, but this thing didn't. It was thinner and shorter than him, also had brown eyes when his are grayish blue. The friend I was walking with mentioned meeting me before I actually met him. He told me I walked up to him and told him he shouldn't be walking around by himself because of creeps in the apartments. He gave me a description of it, and it looked like me expected had an ankle monitor on, had scars I don't have but didn't have the ones I do, made him stay on the left side of it, and that it was trying to get him to follow it to a clearing behind the basketball court, which I don't go to because I had a traumatic experience there. He also mentioned it has asked for the boy who caused that traumatic experience and got angry when he told it he didn't know where the boy was. The boy who caused it hasn't lived in the apartment since 2017. While standing outside, having a cup of coffee and enjoying the warm evening, we heard a scream that sounded like a cross between a human and animal. It lasted several seconds. It was across the river in the forest. I have never heard anything like it. I know what a cougar sounds like. This was not a cougar. We heard no more after that. Have never heard it before or since. My eyes were bugged out, I am sure, and I looked at my husband and said, "What was that?" He laughed and said, "Bigfoot." We are thinking it truly was. My father and I had just left the La Burbuja grocery store and were crossing 32nd to go toward my car when we heard what sounded like a baby crying out. We thought it was maybe one of the neighbors' babies, but then my father said Miramija and was pointing toward the house across the street. I looked and saw a thin, black figure perched on the brick fence post and looking directly at us. This thing was dark black. It actually looked like it was absorbing the light around it. It was very easy to make out the body, the wings, and the long pointed tail that it swished around much like a cat does when it is interested in something. The eyes were the most striking feature, as they were glowing bright red and were locked directly on my father and me. I was frozen in fear, and the only thing going through my mind was how to defend my elderly father if this thing decided to attack us. I could care less about myself, but my father is 70 years old and not able to move or defend himself if he was attacked. I could hear my father praying and asking La Virgen de Guadalupe for protection and to send this thing away. I managed to tell my father that we needed to get into the car as quickly as possible so we could be safe. I pressed the button to the remote and the horn chirped as the alarm was deactivated and the doors unlocked. At the sound of the horn chirping, this thing opened its wings and stood up on the fence post and chirped back at us. It took off and hovered for a few seconds, its wings flapping and making a light whoosh sound. My father and I dove into the relative safety of the car as this thing flew away and was gone from our sight. This thing was maybe 3-4 feet tall and thin, but its wings were large and maybe 10 feet when spread apart. They looked a lot like bat wings. No feathers were visible, as it was jet black. We drove straight home, and my father told my mother and my sister about our encounter with this thing and what had happened. My mother said it was probably a bruja disguised as a lechuza, and that we were lucky we were not attacked either way. She refused to let anyone out of the house for the rest of the night. Help me identify what I ran into. About a year ago, I had moved to a new area in northern Utah, USA. I quite enjoy hiking alone and went on a new trail with my dog one morning around 8 a.m. About 2 miles into the main trail, I came across a path that seemed to have been untouched for some time, but I wanted to explore, so I jumped off the main path. 1-2 miles into this smaller trail, I hiked into what looked like a camping area, but I had not seen it on any of my maps, nor in the area reviews, so I thought this was a bit strange. I hiked past this, then suddenly had a horrible feeling of dread and I froze. The forest had gone silent and my dog was frozen, staring at a nearby bush. Then said bush rustled. Whatever moved inside the bush seemed large, human-sized or bigger. I stood staring when suddenly whatever was there started making loud clicking sounds with its tongue. It was strange because 1, these sounds were much too loud to be human, and 2, they were being made in patterns and increments. After some time, the thing quickly moved up the mountain. Though still obscured by trees, I got a decent idea of how fast it could move. It was again much too quick to be human. It continued clicking, then I saw it dash up and over a ridge. It was tall, at least 6 feet, 1.8 meters, and it had stark black and white coloring. I know my animals, and it was like nothing I have ran into or researched before. I had a coworker swear to me that it was a skinwalker, though I am curious if there is a different cryptic or folklore being that matches this description better. I posted this elsewhere and was referred to this subreddit. I would just like to have a good idea of what I could be dealing with.
There was nothing special about the evening I'm going to share with everyone. I live in these old apartments built in the 60s, but I feel like they were built before that. I went to sleep as I normally would, and my significant other at the time slept next to me. I was closest to the wall. From where I lay in bed, if I get woken up, I can look straight through my closet and into the bathroom and see the mirror in there. I was awakened and I wasn't sure why. I scanned the room, and I didn't see anything in my direct line of sight. My eyes adjusted a bit better, and that's when I looked towards the bathroom, which should have been a straight shot to the mirror. However, there was something there, in the way of the mirror. That's when it occurred to me that I was looking at a shadowy, extremely tall, basically as big and wide as the doorway it was standing in. A tall man with a heavy trench coat, heavy-duty steel-toed boots, and then a wide-brimmed hat. No other features were made out. It looked as though this man was watching us sleep. Instantly thinking it's an intruder, I shook my significant other awake, slowly and quietly. and the best I could without making sudden or obvious movements. They saw what I was shaking them awake for immediately and squeezed my leg. I was so scared I thought surely this is where I'd die. I watched closely at this man, and he didn't seem to move very much. I saw what looked like breathing movements and just small movements in general. I texted my mom because I figured I can't make a phone call to the police. The intruder will hear me. She said I better not be playing, but that she called the cops. It felt like an eternity. We waited, keeping an eye on the figure, but again, no crazy quick movements, just watching us. I would squeeze my significant other's leg when I thought it would be moving. We hear a loud knocking at our door, and it was the cops at that point. My significant other leapt out of the bed and ran for the door. The cops looked around and then started questioning us. There was no figure in the doorway now. Come to find out, the figure was the Hat Man. I only discovered this recently as I thought it was sleep paralysis or something. But watching a YouTube video about entities and ghosts, I heard someone being watched by the same shadowy figure in the same way, but was definitely being watched by this entity. The internet only validated what I saw with pictures. I'm much older now, but when I was a young man in the 1960s, I was stationed at Mount Weather in Virginia. Up until the mid-70s, the base of Mount Weather wasn't very well known. I was chosen to be there because I had no near family. Actually, I had no family at all. I'd been an orphan, and so I had no next of kin or parents of any kind. I think that's largely why I was picked for what happened next. One day I was going about my usual daily business when I was told that I needed to attend an urgent and unplanned meeting. I followed the gentleman across the entire base, all the way to the other side. When I got to the meeting room, there were a bunch of generals that I didn't recognize at all. They were smiling as if they were excited to see me. They welcomed me in and offered me tea and coffee, the usual. From the get-go, I felt uncomfortable about it all. They sat me down and told me that they had an assignment for me. I needed to stand in for a guard. That was away for his health. Seemed like kind of an odd meeting to have just asked me to do such a simple task. I agreed, but they didn't seem too pleased yet. Then they explained to me that the guard I was replacing was stationed in one of the newer underground bunkers that had been built. I had known about them building it. I just didn't know anything about what their purpose was. That day, I learned that they had holding cells down there and that everything that happened in the bunker was top secret. Immediately, it made my hair stand on end. Nothing about it sounded right, but I had already agreed to take the job, and I'm a man of my word. They wasted no time in taking me down there. The bunker was well lit and state-of-the-art for that era. They marched me fast through the halls. I barely had time to look at anything. At one point, I asked them to slow down so that I could remember how to get back when my shift was over. They informed me that when my shift was done, someone would come and get me. Again, I didn't like the way any of this was sounding, but I was already there, and I had already signed the paperwork. They put me outside this one room and instructed me to keep guard. They told me that inside was a dangerous prisoner, and that should something happen to pull the alarm that was on the wall to my left. I agreed, and they were on their way. Nothing about it seemed normal to me. But in those days, we trusted everyone that was in the military without question. So I did just that. It was a pretty uneventful night, and when my shift was over, someone came to fetch me and told me to be ready for them at the same time the following night. Again, I did as I was told, and the next night, they took me back to the cell that I needed to guard. This went on for 4 nights. On the 5th night, I was starting to get really bored of the job. Nothing happened. I had no idea who was in the cell, and I had no desire to look. There was a small window that could be opened up here inside, but I was under strict instruction not to do so. That night, though, something finally happened within the cell. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I heard a shrieking sound. It was loud enough to pierce right through the thick walls of the cell. The shriek was followed by intense banging. It sounded like something was being thrown from one side of the cell to the other. I could hear it bounce from one side of the cell to the other and off the roof of the cell even. It was insane. I waited a few minutes and it died down. With a sigh of relief, I carried on with my duty of standing guard. Then it happened again. But this time it was banging against the door of the cell, still shrieking loudly. It took me a moment, and I realized that the banging sound wasn't followed by the sound of something falling. This means whoever it was, they weren't throwing an item. They were throwing themselves around that room. It reminded me of a crazed animal that had been trapped against its will. I couldn't imagine who would have enough strength to throw themselves with that much force, so my curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the little window. I really wish I hadn't. What I saw was a creature so large. It filled almost the entire cell. It had completely white eyes and a wide snarl. Drool dripped from its open mouth as it shrieked again, rattling the small window. Not a single hair was on its body, and I could see the bones of its ribs and spine. It was clear that it hadn't eaten in a while. I slammed the window shut and hoped it would quiet down so that I didn't need to ring the alarm. Thankfully, that's exactly what happened. I spent my entire life keeping this story to myself. In those days, we obeyed the rules without question, and so that's what I've done. They told me never to say anything, so I haven't. I figured that now all the men who I'd been in agreement with are likely dead, so I might be off the hook. I don't know what I saw, and I wish I hadn't seen it. Perhaps someone out there has the answers for me. One thing I can tell you, though, is that if something doesn't feel right, it's likely because it isn't. I rented a room from a very dark energy person. Lots of things were always happening. This dark energy person moved in about the same time I did, and shortly after, all the trees in the yard started to die, one by one, and there was a lot, and they were watered and treated for bugs and tended to. All different kinds, a peach tree, a huge pine tree, 2 junipers, an apple tree. I don't know what they all were, but it's certainly something to take note of if this happens to you, even if it's just the houseplants that die suddenly. This person started to zero in on me. I stayed in my room all the time to avoid having to deal with this person directly. Then things started to appear in my blankets, body shapes, like a head under the blankets or an arm or a leg. Things started to appear under the bed. I could hear and feel them moving around or hitting my mattress. If you really want to get freaked out, take a video of under your bed when you are having something like this happen or an anxiety attack. Then something under the bed, we can call it the bone man, would come and wrestle me for my blanket or clothing in the dark, waking me up, fighting for my blankets. I never saw this entity. It was always dark. One night it was pulling on my clothing. I had to grab its bone fingers and pry them loose at least 4 times from my shirt. I was more asleep than awake while doing this, so I was thinking to myself the wooden buttons on my shirt were getting stuck on my wooden headboard, and I had to pry each button loose one by one. By the time I got to the 5th button, I was fully awake and realized I had a t-shirt, no buttons, and what I thought was a wooden surface catching my shirt by its buttons was actually bone fingers. This thing tried to kill me with bones 3 times in a span of about 8 months. It would do so by shoving what felt like a chicken leg bone down my throat, blocking my airway, so I could not breathe. I don't know how I survived the final attempt. I was without oxygen for quite some time. I have no way of knowing how long, but it was a long time. I remember thinking this time I am going to die. It was horrible. As a native Floridian and avid hunter growing up, I've seen and have heard lots of things in the woods around our great state. Some things were easy to understand, and some things were just not explainable. Anyway, this is my and my mother's story. I had her proofread this before sending it to make sure I remember this correctly. It's the fall of 1976, and I was 5 years old. My mom and I lived in Kathleen, Florida, on the edge of the Green Swamp. Back then it was a dirt road, and there were only a couple of houses on the road, and a relatively new trailer park at the end of the road. We had to drive a little less than half a mile back down our trail of a driveway to get to our home. It was an old wood frame home that was over 100 years old. We had an artesian well pump in the kitchen, and for the first few months we lived there, we had to heat the water on the gas stove to have hot bath water. This was an old cracker house on blocks and had a front porch that I used to play under all the time. The roof of the porch was on a pitch and the edge was over the wooden stairs. It measured 7'6" from the ground to the roof line. So it was nearly dusk when my mom and I were coming down the drive in her VW bus. She had lights on high to spot any deer that might be on the property. As we rounded the curve in the driveway and the lights shined on the house, that's when we both saw it, and it was big and broad and looking directly at our car. Now, I'm not going to tell you it had big red eyes. The eye shine that I saw for only a split second was golden. It turned and walked down the side of the house between the cow pasture fence and the house. My mom hit the gas and went around the great oak tree that was at the corner of the porch. She got around the side of the house, and we saw nothing. She grabbed a .38 revolver and jumped out of the car, telling me to lock the doors. Little good that would have done looking back. So, with the car off, headlights shining, and my mom at our fence line, she stood and stayed quiet. Our hunting dogs that were in their kennels were whimpering. They normally barked at anything when we came home. Not this night. They were scared. There's more to the story. The next day, we looked for prints. The porch and the oak tree size is relevant because it's what we used to size up our guest. The creature was standing next to our porch, and his head was just under the edge of the roof, 7'6" at the edge of the overhang. So now, being older and having a firm grasp on measurement, I'm guessing this thing was 7 feet tall. It was nearly as thick or wide as the great oak tree. Based on what our landlord later told us, it was about 90 years old. We had cows and hunting dogs. We even had a calf that was about 400 pounds or so that I would hand feed and had bottle fed because his mother died shortly after birthing. Anyway, my mom was calling the calf to get him to come to the fence. It wouldn't come. She called again. Nothing. Silence. All of a sudden, we heard the most god-awful scream from what we thought was that calf. And then, nothing. So this whole time, I'm in the car. The door is locked and the windows cracked so I could hear. My mom ran back to the car. I opened her door and she backed us out of there quick and went to her girlfriend's house, who lived about a half-hour away. Mom was rattled. She talked the whole way. "Did you see it?" "Yes, Mama, I saw it. It was big and hairy. Did you hear the calf?" she asked. "Mom, I did. You think it's dead, Mama? Do you smell it?" She slammed on the brakes and nearly put me in the dash. "You could smell it too?" "Yes, it stunk bad. Worse than the dogs." We got to my mom's friend's house and she got on the phone with Mr. Goldsby. He was the landlord. She nervously told him what happened. She nearly dropped the phone. He said it was a skunk ape. It's been around for years. Damn thing stinks too. The next day we went home and met with Mr. Goldsby. He came to the house to see if we could find anything. We found footprints right by the porch where it stood when we saw it. We measured them and they were just over 15 inches long. Several tracks led to the fence. These tracks had nearly a 60-inch stride in between. Mom and Mr. Goldsby went into the cow pasture. She wouldn't let me come because there was a lot of dog fennel growing all around and some palmetto patches. They found the calf. It was dead, and his neck and head had been pulled up and backward to where his spine was pulled up past his shoulders and broken. Mom said there was very blood around. My mom asked Mr. Goldsby why he didn't tell us about this before. He simply said he was so used to it, coming around and not bothering anything, that he didn't think he needed to. We moved 2 weeks later. It was around 9 p.m. when my sister had went outside to feed our dog when she noticed our dog was going crazy, growling and barking forwards the alley. Once she turned, my sister says she saw a small creature around 3 feet in height, walking upright, its body full of spikes, and it was waddling. She said it went through the fence. Not over, not under. Through the fence. She said that it was making panting, heavy breathing noises as it was waddling away. This was over 10 years ago, but I still remember hearing the dog going crazy, and my sister's scream and how shaken up she was. Wanted to get other people input about what type of creature we may have encountered? My sister still to this day says the exact same story and how much it scared her. I believe she encountered something that night. Update. She saw this creature in the alley with the dim alley lights on. It wasn't pitch black as the lights. Yes, dim, but they were still on. Also, I have brought up the porcupine theory to her and have shown her many pictures, even ones where they are standing up. She denies this is what she saw. The creature was never at any point on all fours. It walked on two legs the entire time and went through a chain-link fence like it wasn't even there. Our neighborhood has cats, skunks, raccoons, opossums, but never, ever had any sightings or dogs getting quilled by porcupines. It was about 8:30 p.m. While taking out the trash at work with a co-worker or roommate, a large dog approached us. It seemed to be galloping. It wasn't walking normally, like an animal should. Despite the many surrounding lights, the dog appeared to be entirely black. It was silhouetted just enough that you could see its muscle definition. I could see a slight reflection in its eyes. It seemed to lack a shadow. My roommate and I both expressed having different experiences and visions of the dog. When I initially saw the dog, I interacted saying, "Aw, dog," in excitement. For me, it proceeded to sit entirely still on the cement, staring like a statue. What I saw was a large, fluffy, black dog. Lazy ears. Similar to a Newfoundland dog, my roommate expresses seeing the dog as a large, very muscular, aggressive-looking black dog that stood rigid the entire time, staring like it wanted to attack. It was short-haired, muscled, and had pointed ears. I jokingly stated that the dog looked like a skinwalker, not really anticipating that anything would happen. Then we immediately felt a wake of dread fall over us. Something was wrong. We both saw the dog's jaw open, almost as if it was about to bark. We heard a distant yet extremely clear, high-pitched "come here." The dog immediately turned to take off. We turned around the corner. The creature was unreasonably far up the road for the short amount of time that it was not being observed. It was wobbling, crossing its paws, walking oddly. When it turned left around a corner, it seemed to nearly stand up on its hind paws, walking on two legs, just before passing around out of sight. The rest of the night was just as interesting. We had trouble with certain objects slightly moving place, nudging a bit, settling. It quickly became more aggressive. But then, just as we were about to leave, we heard a loud and persistent knocking coming from the front of the store. We quickly went to our cars. On the drive home, I tried to blast music and ignore what I had just seen. I heard whispering coming from my back seat. I couldn't quite make out any words. It just sounded like whistling almost. But get this, I saw a random antique clawfoot bathtub on the left side of the road, in a field. It was certainly not there the day before, or even that morning on my drive there. The kicker, I was watching the sidelines of the roads for animals, and I most certainly saw a buck. He was leaping out in front of the road, a good 50 feet ahead. I slammed on my brakes, but when I got closer, it was merely a bush. Perhaps I was just paranoid, but this is all very concerning. It was later in the evening when I was driving back to my in-laws' house by myself and was going down a dirt road. I saw something in the ditch up ahead and on the right and didn't really know what it was until I got up far enough so that my headlights could catch it. I didn't know anything about dogmen until a couple of years ago. This thing had an outline of a huge dog, but when I got closer, it turned and looked at me. I just floored it. It didn't really bother me until I noticed it looking at me, and I saw that it was actually grasping what it was eating. I got back and didn't say exactly what I saw. I just asked them if there were any big dogs or wolves up where they lived. My father-in-law just laughed and said, "No." Then he asked why. I didn't say anything. The thing I will never forget are the reddish-orange eyes that just kept staring at me. As a witch, I have had my fair share of negative entities such as the Shadow Walker. You know the feeling that you get that someone or something is watching you in your room after you lay down to go to sleep, or ever see someone walk by you only for no one to be there? Most of the time, that's a shadow walker. They normally go after witches or people with high energy levels. They are similar to demons. They often watch and observe you, but like any other negative entity, they will sometimes get violent if they can't get your energy. But this is quite rare. 99% of the time, they will just leave you alone for a while, then come back to observe and watch you. Sometimes when you're asleep, they will whisper or breath heavily into your ear. Pay no attention to it. They're just trying to scare you, but if they start leaving cuts and bruises, cleanse your house immediately and have protection by your bed, whether it's a cross, rune, or spell bottle. Keep it by your bed. That is all for now. Friends, may good luck and safety come to you. On Christmas, I left out a pretty bowl full of beautiful polished agates and Eye of Shiva shells. Yesterday, I saw that some of the stones were on the ground, but it was raining, so I was unable to get a good look until this morning. I originally thought the stones had just been scattered, but they weren't. Several were laying on the ground as if someone had been looking through them one by one, setting the ones they didn't want on the ground so they could look through the bowl. I should have taken a photo, but I was excited and just went into cleanup mode and put the stones back into the bowl. I did notice that they took all but one of the Shiva shells, and that one happened to get covered by a leaf. I made sure to look through the leaves that were on the ground right there, and there were no more Shiva eyes left. I also think they took some of the agates because it looks like there were fewer. Earlier this morning, while it was still dark, I took my dog out to pee. I suddenly turned because I felt like I was being watched, and a pair of those eyes were just 20-30 feet away from me, peeking just over the top of one of the cars in the driveway. Holy shit. Y'all, I've seen their eyes so much, but never this close. They are huge. I thought it was a reflection on the roof of the car, but there were no light sources to be reflected. Then it clicked that I was seeing two round, yellow eyes bobbing up and down from the other side of the car. It startled the shit out of me. I hurried my dog up to get him inside. Then I went out to the back deck to watch their next moves. I never saw them, but I can feel their energy. I'm an empath or clairsentient. And once I felt it go back to the woods, I went back out the front and saw them looking for me from the trees, directly north of the car's driveway. They were peeking around a bunch like they were trying to see me. Honestly, I just stood there for a few, watching them watch me. Dawn was breaking, so I knew they needed to go before they could be seen. As it was getting lighter, my mom called for me, so I just went ahead and left the driveway and went back into the house. Sorry for not thinking to take a photo of how they left the bowl. Someone would have probably called it fake anyways. I'm going to order more shells to repeat this experiment. I went to Joshua Tree a few days ago in an Airbnb with 3 of my friends. The house was a nice size and had to be accessed by an unpaved dirt road. The closest house to us was maybe a mile away. All houses in this area have private driveways too. On one of our drives back from getting groceries, I had saw an animal run away from our headlights super fast, but I couldn't make it out. I assumed it was like a deer or something because of how big it was. But all I had seen in the desert were quails. No big animals. That night I had a dream that my friends and I were searching for something, and we were taken to a basement full of things, and there was a small house with a red door. We went inside, but I don't remember what was there. This may or may not have anything to do with my experience, but I read here that dreams do have correlation. One of the nights of our stay, we had a bonfire and did some stargazing. I had to pee at one point, so I went inside and was gone for maybe 5 minutes. When my friend and I came back, my 2 other friends weren't sitting by the fire. I just sat and waited a couple minutes for them to come back, but ended up going inside to check for them. But they weren't there. We go back out and start calling for them and get no response instead. We hear coughing close by the right side of the house where the pool was. We immediately knew it was our friend because they had been kind of reserved. Our first instinct was to find them and help. At some points of the trip, we had gotten concerned if they were sick or something, but they ended up feeling a lot better. We start to go looking for them by the pool, but we call again, and in response, we just hear the same exact cough, same pitch. It was the same cough, maybe 4 or 5 times. We thought our friend was throwing up or maybe smoking. Usually when we called for them, they'd answer immediately, except for this time. There was just more coughing. The last time we called, they had finally answered and started coming around from the opposite side of the house, and the sounds of them walking and taking came from the left side of the house just seconds after we heard the coughing on the right side, and they were completely oblivious to everything that was happening. They had no idea about the coughing and didn't even hear us calling until they got closer to the house. As soon as I realized the coughing was a lure for us, it confirmed that something had been keeping an eye on us. Based off of what I've read, I'm very sure I had a skinwalker experience. I'll answer any questions. I also need to know if I should get cleansed. Edit. This can't be chalked up to hearing things because of weed. We all have high tolerances and weed doesn't make you hear things. We were both very aware, and I was probably the most sober. It was very quiet too. We had just turned off the music because we were talking. We ended up smoking later that night, and the friend we thought we heard coughing has such a soft cough. You can barely hear it. The pitch of the coughing we heard specifically sounded like our friend, but as if something was stuck in their throat or throwing up. Added extra detail so it doesn't seem like I'm an unaware pothead. I was sleeping and kept waking up. I checked the time and it's noon, and I figured I might as well sleep in a little more. I turned over a few times to look at my boyfriend, sound asleep beside me. I even kept touching my back to him to help me fall back asleep. After some more tossing and turning, I decide I might as well just get up and start my day. Carefully, I get out of bed so as not to wake him up. As soon as I open the bedroom door, there he is on our couch, wrapped up in his towels, fresh from the shower. I jumped a little because I was 100% sure he had been laying in bed next to me the whole time. I ask him, "When did you get up?" And he says noon. I wrote it off as maybe I was too tired and imagined him, or maybe he had the time wrong for when he got up. But I remember looking at his sleeping face and touching our backs together. I haven't mentioned anything to him or anyone else, but I can't stop thinking about it. I live in Eastern Europe, and I need help to ID a phenomenon that happened to me back when I was 12. It was spring, and I was visiting my grandparents like every other weekend when I decided I wanted to light some firecrackers near the woods and the creek nearby. When I went there, after the first one, I felt watched, and all sounds except my thoughts became silent. No birds, no insects, only me. I continue, but that feeling never went away. I eventually started slowly backtracking to the trail, and when I felt that the thing wasn't seeing me well behind the plant life and trees, I sprinted to my grandparents' house. Before you rule out the story and say that it was bear or something like that, you need to know that there weren't even deer where I lived. The biggest predator up out there, to my knowledge, was or is a fox, and I know that because me and my dad hunt in that area. I grew up in a small western Massachusetts town, Adams, below the Berkshires. It was July 4, 2017. I worked in a cafe in town and had to work during the holiday. My shift ended around 5 o'clock, and I had plans to go to the Bellevue Cemetery with friends for some peace and quiet. I was tired of all the noise from the day and wasn't interested in fireworks that night. I met up with everyone outside my house, and we picked up some fast food before leaving. There are about 5 of us, and we all started walking down to the cemetery, eating and chatting as we made our way to the cemetery. The cemetery wasn't huge, but it was big enough that we could find a quiet place to sit and hang out for a bit. After we got there, we were all settled under a tree. I relaxed and just listened while everyone else was talking. I was still reeling from work and how busy the day was for me. That's when I noticed something moving in the distance behind a few mausoleums. It was dark, and I could only make out a shadow. I couldn't tell what I was looking at, and figured an animal had come down from the mountain and wandered into town after smelling all the barbecuing. Then I saw whatever it was sprint from behind one mausoleum to the next. It was way too big to be a wolf or a mountain lion, but too fast to be anything large like a bear. It startled me for a minute. I couldn't imagine any animal I could think of being out in the light of day like this. It made me nervous. My friends noticed a change in the look on my face and asked me what was wrong. I didn't want to say I saw a big scary shadow running around the cemetery. I thought they'd make fun of me, so I just shrugged it off and said it was nothing. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. Right then, I saw the figure again. It sprinted back further into the cemetery, this time behind gravestones and then behind a tree. My curiosity got the best of me at this point, and I played it off like I needed to walk. I headed off in the direction of the shadow when I saw it take off again. I noticed it had an unbelievably large head. I couldn't tell how tall it was, but I knew it was bigger than any of us, and the quick glance that I got at it reminded me of a man completely covered in hair. I just thought that my mind was playing tricks on me, but I was still curious. I approached the mausoleum that it had been hiding behind. I looked down to be sure not to trip and froze. There in the dirt was an enormous footprint the size of my forearm and complete with claws right there in the soil. I started to panic, a little puzzled by something I didn't yet understand. I had never heard of a creature with a footprint so big in my whole life. I proceeded with caution towards the tree that it had ducked behind. I just needed to know if I was crazy or if we were actually in danger. I got to the tree and found nothing behind it. No one was crouching or hiding from us. That's when a cluster of leaves fell from the tree above and hit me on their way down. I heard a loud rustling too. There was no breeze. I slowly lifted my head to look up. There, glaring down at me, was a hideous dog creature with eyes shaped like a human but amber, colored and terrifyingly piercing. This dog creature was as long as the branch it was laying on as it slowly growled at me. I ran back to my friends and told them we had to go immediately. They protested at first, but then one of them caught a glimpse of the creature jumping down from the tree. She didn't get a good look at it, only a shadow, and all she could tell was that it was huge. We all grabbed our things and made our way out of the cemetery. The friend that had seen the shadow asked me what it was. I played it off saying I didn't see the shadow, only signs of a coyote circling around, and felt scared. I didn't describe the dog creature or acknowledge it. I no longer live in the area and haven't heard of any encounters with the dog creature since my encounter. Maybe it went into the mountains and stayed there. A couple, Marcos and Sonia Rivera, involved in previous encounters, were standing on their balcony in their residence, located on a hill, when at one point they noticed something strange and large flying over the area. Using a pair of binoculars, both were stunned to see that they were looking at gigantic winged human-like figures, at least 25 feet in height. There were two figures, and both appeared to be playing in midair, performing circling maneuvers. At first, they were together. One of them was white in color, and the other one dark, and both had large white eagle-like wings. It suddenly started to rain, and both flew towards the northeast, disappearing from sight.
I have always been fascinated by Yellowstone National Park. The sprawling wilderness dotted with hot springs and geysers is like nowhere else on Earth. It's a place of natural beauty and wonder, but also a place of secrets and darkness. I was a park ranger in Yellowstone, tasked with ensuring the safety of all who entered its boundaries. One day, I received a report of a missing camper. His friends had gone searching for him, but to no avail. It was my job to pick up the search and bring him back safely. As I ventured into the dense forests of the park, a sense of unease washed over me. The trees seemed to close in on me, blacking out the sunlight. I had a feeling that something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I pushed on, following the trail left by the missing camper. The deeper I went, the more disturbing the signs became. Broken branches, shredded clothing, and pools of blood dotted the path. And then I found him. The missing camper was lying on the ground, his body torn apart by some unknown beast. The sight was enough to make me nauseous, but I knew I had to investigate further. That's when I heard it. The sound of footsteps, not human, but something else. Something big and dangerous. I turned around, my hand reaching for my weapon, but it was too late. The creature attacked, its jaws snapping at my flesh. I don't remember much after that. When I woke up, I was in an old cabin deep in the woods. I was being tended to by a woman who claimed to be a member of a secret religious order tasked with protecting the world from the supernatural. She told me that the creature that had attacked me was a werewolf, one of the many things that the government wanted to keep secret. The Secret Service was aware of the supernatural creatures roaming the park and had assigned her to protect the public from the truth. But as the days passed, I realized that the woman was not who she claimed to be. She was working for the very creatures she was supposed to be stopping, and her true intention was to use me as bait to draw more people into their grasp. I was horrified and scared, but I knew I had to escape. I made a break for it in the dead of night, but the werewolf was hot on my heels. I ran as fast as I could, but the creature caught up to me, its claws tearing into my flesh. I don't know how I managed to survive, but I did. I stumbled out of the woods, my body battered and broken. I was taken to the hospital, but I never fully recovered. I was forever scarred, both physically and mentally, by my experience in Yellowstone National Park. The Secret Service tried to cover up what had happened to me, but the truth leaked out. People began to whisper about the werewolves in the park, and the government was forced to admit to their existence. But for me, the truth came too late. I was forever changed by my encounter with the supernatural, and I could never shake the feeling that I was being watched. The end of my story is tragic, but the terror of what happened in Yellowstone National Park still lives on. So I live in the rurals of Indiana, U.S. It's pretty stereotypical. A gravel road surrounded by cornfields, all that. It gets pretty spooky at times. Cornfields are creepy at night, and it always sounds like something is running through them. Dark, twisting shadows from trees in our yard. Occasionally weird animal calls. Yada, yada, yada. One time I forgot to feed the outside dogs during the afternoon, so I had to go out back and feed them even though it was dark out. When I turned around, I swear I saw a figure lumber over the peak of the roof behind the chimney like it was hiding from me. It terrified me, and I sprinted back inside, which actually felt more scary considering I was running the direction of the thing I just thought I saw. But the real story comes from a few weeks before, and why that fleeting thought scared me so bad. So bit of backstory, my dog can best be described as a punk. He's a miniature schnauzer, but he thinks he's big and scary. He is fearless to a pretty stupid degree. We had a pack of coyotes walk through our empty field, and I had to sprint and tackle him to stop him from confronting the entire pack, growling and barking the whole way. Same story when he escaped the fence and went for a nearby neighbor's 2 angry boxers. So animals don't scare my stupid dog. And as I mentioned, he had gotten in the habit of escaping his fence. So one night, it's like 3 a.m., and he wakes me up and is whining and groaning and clearly has to go outside. Well, he had been escaping, and I hadn't fixed the fence, so I hooked a leash on him and went outside. The motion light came on, and I could see it's insanely foggy. The fog was so thick I could barely see the car in the drive, maybe 30 feet from where I was standing. So I was a little unsettled. But I take him out, and he does his business, and he starts sniffing around. And he kind of was whining like he was smelling something weird, and he started circling and being agitated. Well, I thought I'd walk him through the yard to calm him down so I could go back to sleep. Well, like I said, he has never been scared of another animal, and his response to seeing anything is run up to it, barking. But he stopped and focused hard, and his breathing started going really fast. But he was standing close by me, not pulling on the leash. I followed his gaze, and I saw this dark figure, bigger than a person, lumbering across the yard. It almost looked like a large person hunched over, maybe on 4 legs, maybe not bear-sized, but I've never ever seen a bear anywhere near here. Cornfields and towns between 2 cities is where I live. No bears. The fact that he was clearly scared and didn't want to engage this thing, mixed with I couldn't tell what it was at all. I ran back inside, and he very happily followed, and he sat down once inside and just looked up at me, whining like he was scared. Single most terrifying experience of my life. This was a cold and cloudy winter evening, and I had just woke up from a nice little power nap. I was tired as usual after every power nap, so I slowly got up and went to the kitchen to get something to eat. I got some food, heated it up, and went to go sit down and watch some YouTube. I sat down and found a video of urban legends on my home page. I was interested, so I clicked on it and watched it. It showed the usual goat man and mothman, but one urban legend caught my eye. A urban legend called the Orange Eyes. I was intrigued and watched it. The video creator said that it was a Bigfoot-type creature. It was tall and had glowing orange eyes. But what I was really surprised about was it was an urban legend from my state. So after I heard that information, I searched up where it's supposedly at and found that it was only a 15-minute drive from me. So like any other adventurous human, I hit up my friend and asked if he wanted to come with me and go look for it. He told me that he doesn't believe in that stuff. And it was a waste of time, but I begged him. And finally, after a couple of minutes, he agreed. I was really excited. I got dressed and packed some flashlights because it was almost 9. After I was done packing up supplies, I got in my car and headed to pick my friend up. When I got there, he didn't look too excited and said that he was tired. He got in the car and we were on our way. I told him the details and what the thing looked like, and he said that there's no way that thing is real. I told him that it will be fun and that there's probably nothing out there. We got to the road that would take up straight to the area we could get out at to be closer to the forest entrance. While driving down the road, I couldn't help shake the feeling of being watched, but I tried to not notice the feeling and kept heading down to the entrance. We got to the entrance and I handed my buddy a flashlight because it was pitch black outside. I told him if he was ready and he said that he was good. So we start the nightmarish journey into the forest of the Orange Eyes. We walked for a good hour or so with nothing really happening. My buddy said that he was tired and wanted to go back home, but I told him, let's stay for 2 more hours. He agreed and we continued walking. I couldn't shake off the feeling again of being watched. I told my friend if he felt the same way, and he said, yeah. Ever since we turned onto the road that headed down here, I felt like I was being watched. We both were on edge now as we continued forward. Not too long after the feeling of being watched, we hear to our right something being snapped, like if someone or something stepped on a branch. We both jumped at the sound of it and pointed our flashlights over in the direction of the noise. But to our relief, it was just a little deer. We joked around with each other about who jumped more at the sound. We did this for a minute or two. We were in the middle of having a little argument when we heard heavy breathing coming from my left. We stopped arguing and listened closely to see if it was what we heard. We heard the heavy breathing like we thought we did. I didn't want to shine my light over there, so I tried to see if I could see anything. Thinking back to it, I wish I didn't look because what I saw would haunt me for the rest of my life. What I saw standing there behind a tree was 10-foot creature standing there with one of its eyes peering around the tree. And what shook me down to the core was that its eyes were orangish red color. At this point, I wanted to pass out from fear, but I stopped that from happening. I looked at my buddy and I could tell that he saw it too. I told him that we need to get out of here now before it's too late. We both agreed that we would take off at a dead sprint back to the car. I told him on 3, we will go. I started to count, but I couldn't even get to 2 when felt a warm breath hit the back of my neck. At that point, I screamed, run. We kicked it into 6th gear and ran as fast as we could. As we were running, I heard the tree moving and felt the ground shaking. My lungs were burning from the thin, cold air. We ran for what felt like hours until we saw the car. I reached into my pocket for my car key and with one swift movement unlocked the car, opened the door, and turned the car on. I put the car in reverse so fast I felt like I could have been a stuntman for a racing movie. I hit the gas, flung the car around like a action movie. I put the car in drive and floored it down the road, never looking back once. Once we felt like we were a good distance away to ease up a bit, I asked my buddy if he was okay, and he said he was fine. All I did on the drive home was think about how close the creature was to me for me to feel its breath. I dropped my buddy off and told him to be safe and take care. When I got home, I took everything off, took a shower, and went to bed. The next morning was good. I felt like the day before was just a bad dream. But I realized really soon that it was real, because the backpack that I had used to carry my stuff had a big slash in it, probably from the thing or a tree branch. From when we were running away, I called my friend to check if he was all right and continued my day after. By now, I've kind of gotten over it and my friend doesn't think of it anymore. From that experience, I don't want to go to a forest to hike or camp anymore. I hope you take something from this and learn to not be stupid like me and go out to a forest at night. This actually happened. I'm serious. The only reason why I even tell people is because my friend saw it with me and we still talk about it to this day. B16 or 17 friend came by to tutor me in calculus about 10 p.m. at night. I let my friend drive my car to his house. He lived out in the outskirts of town where there's nothing but orchards of almonds. Passed by a cattle ranch with lots of lights. Silence in the car. I'm on shotgun and I see a bull running on its 2 legs like a human. Bull turns its head towards us. Red glowing eyes bull looks like it's getting ready to spin around but then evaporates. Look towards my friend and ask him, "Did you see that?" My friend replies, "Did it look like a bull running on 2 legs with red glowing eyes and then it disappeared?" "Yes, I saw that." WTF. That was about 10 years ago. My coworker came in his day off just to tell me that his friend saw the exact same thing 6 years after the incident. 100% true story. My wife and I were traveling to the Smoky Mountains from Ohio on an anniversary getaway. We usually avoid highways in our travels and instead prefer the scenic and slower-paced state routes of my childhood. This trip stood out as quite a disaster as we struggled with both the GPS and paper maps while navigating a route I was at least somewhat familiar with. Navigational errors are not our norm, and we quickly found ourselves having an uncharacteristic argument that got fairly heated but was nonsensical. It was like we spoke different languages and were looking at different maps. We eventually found ourselves in increasingly less populated areas and poorer road conditions. For those not familiar with the area, being in central Kentucky, the forest is hilly and expansive, dotted with small towns and the occasional privately owned farm amidst all the federal land. We had eventually quieted down, anxiously following the GPS as it cut in and out. Our anxiety grew until the GPS suddenly chimed in with turn left. Now, I responded by reluctantly starting the turn when my wife suggested it must be a shortcut we were unaware of. Upon completing the turn, I slowed, seeing the road took a sudden drop in quality. Potholes large enough to get a tire stuck in, overgrown scrub growth on the edges, and ominous gnarled vines hanging down. The hair stood up on my neck as it still does right now as I ride it. Bringing the car to a stop, I asked my wife, "Are you sure about this?" as I look towards her. "No, we need to turn around," she starts to say, but is cut off, almost frozen staring at her phone. Not in the way a person freezes when terror sends their muscles trembling, but completely motionless. I instinctively slam it and reverse back and into the position we came so that I could continue the course we were on. As we reached the end of our reverse turn, I slammed it into drive but went nowhere as the rear of the early 2000s Lincoln is lifted off the ground. Before I can process what is happening, something charged from the woods to our right. At first, it was a large red blob that moved with a speed and grace that seemed unnatural to its grotesque nature. As it closed the gap, it was clear that it was running on all fours, but only partly so. Its forward movement agile but uneven as it irregularly used its arms with its oddly bent hind legs. It was almost like its limbs were growing as it eventually came to stand on its hind legs and place its hands on the glass. Up close, I could see what I thought seemed more like strands of rotten flesh that grew as thick as a shaggy dog and smelled overwhelmingly of rotten fish and moth. Its hands looked nearly human, were it not for the rotten fur and long claws. The face sticks with me as much as the smell, being somewhat shaped like a human that has its face twisted and pulled forward in vague canine shape with large, pointed ears toward the top of its head. Inside, its snarling mouth were long, narrow teeth that looked almost too large to close. But the eyes were the worst part, bloodshot and yellow. They leered at my wife with a hunger, the kind of hunger that promises unspeakable things. When you are in a flight or fight situation, you usually get that distinct moment of clarity where you make your choice even if it's one you are ashamed of. In that moment, I felt like a small dog defending my mate from a rabid wolf. I stomped the gas pedal and bellowed hard. "Go! Now!" And a series of loud noises that sounded more like barks than human noises. It jolted suddenly, and the rear of the car drops, leading to a loud peel-out. It kept pace with us, scratching at the car and banging on it until we broke 45 miles per hour, driving wildly through the winding country until we saw the lights of a town in the distance. We parked in a well-lit parking lot in the center of town next to a gas station. We busied ourselves as we inspected the car, reluctantly sharing what we thought we saw. She was in tears and sobbing about feeling a pressure in her head and that she was conscious but paralyzed. Looking under the trunk, I spotted a cracked strut and a lump of the rotten flesh dangling from a frame member. The smell was still overpowering and sent us into a tear-filled hug as we stared at a piece of the filthy creature and realized it was likely at least two of them, the one in the window and the one that lifted the rear axle of the ground. Thoroughly shaken, we sat in the car facing opposite directions and discreetly unpacked our handguns and hid them under our blankets. We waited until 9 or so before setting back off towards our destination via highway. I'm a 32-year-old lady from the very northern tip of West Virginia. Most of my life has been lived in Hancock County. When I was little, we camped in tents, walked everywhere, hiked at parks. All that outside goodness. In my teens, we started going to state parks, to ride horses. I've been to Tomlinson Run, Beaver Creek State Park, Salt Fork, Raccoon Creek, and Vista Park. I think that was the name. We had a friend who was constantly inviting us to ride on people's land she had received permission from. I'm well acquainted with the local wildlife. I've seen all the major players, including coy dogs and bears, and can identify most sounds in the forest. I love watching nature documentaries. I was looking to become a vet, so I studied a lot on animals. Drawing and painting them got me very acquainted with animal anatomy. Was I ever into cryptozoology? Yes, I was a Dino crazy little girl. My one babysitter had Reader's Digest Mysteries of the Unexplained. The thought of a plesiosaur in Scotland or an apatosaurus in the Congo was just mind-blowing. Later in life, I started looking at it like folklore. It was interesting to read the accounts and learn the theories behind what people were seeing, but I believed in them as much as a folklorist believes in dragons and trolls. I didn't have any interest in Bigfoot, and I'd never heard of dogmen. I never had interest in looking, nor did the thoughts ever cross my mind. It seems I didn't need to go looking. They found me. We moved to the farm when I was about 10. Mom's dream was to have horses, and she was finally able to live it. The farmhouse was haunted, mainly by the former residents of the house. I never felt threatened by them, though. It's a little unnerving to have two men talking and moving the couch you're sitting on. Or should I say, it sounded like it. No one was home. No media was on, and yet I was hearing two men talking about how they were going to move the couch and where, and the sound of furniture being dragged right from under me. The land itself had its share of strangeness. Most things were benign, though. We just shrugged and carried on. I honestly hated our woods. Anywhere else, I'd freely hike, but even in the yard, sometimes I felt watched. Heck, sometimes I thought something was staring in our windows. Now that I think of it, we did have things slam into our trailer. I think it was a horse that had gotten loose, but when I'd go out to investigate, I'd find nothing. I'd chalk it up to a deer. I use my horses' breeds for their names rather than think up names for them. Anyone who knows me knew my horses' names. I was 18 to 19 in this encounter. By this time, we gave up on cows. I hate them, and just had the horses and chickens. Someone knocked on the door at 2 a.m. I'd only been asleep 2 hours, but years of conditioning had my heart pumping and my mind clearing. Someone knocking that early meant trouble. It usually meant horses or livestock had gotten out. I wasn't disappointed. Our neighbor said the horses were in his yard. My mind wasn't totally awake, so I didn't think to ask which yard they were in. My stepfather came out, asked what was up, and told me they were my horses, so deal with it. Mom was working. That was nothing new. This lot of horses had 3 expert escape artists. I had the routine down. It was pretty dark out, but I did have some moonlight to help. The security light only went so far. Then, of course, it shut off after so long. When it was cloudy, you literally had to watch that you didn't walk off into the ravine. It was so pitch. I was naturally in a foul mood, cursing my horses and wondering if some drunk had gone through the fence. Again, it happened a lot. As I got closer to the brown barn, I realized a horse was flipping out. It was running back and forth, squealing and carrying on. I went in and grabbed the halters and leads. I paused for a moment to see if any other horse or horses had replied to the horse I heard squeal. That would give me an idea where the other horse or horses might be. There was no reply. That was odd. I was thinking, crap, they're on the other side of the hill. It was the only reason in my mind they wouldn't be replying. Let's just say when they followed our cut trails to the other side, it took us an hour to traverse through the woods and lead them back. And even with 2 guys on a 4-wheeler and my mom, that was a freaky treat. I felt like I was being watched and followed. Maybe it wasn't paranoia. So the land is set up like this. The brown barn was connected to a small pasture, about half an acre long, which then connects to a 7-acre pasture. Pretty much in the center, on the outside edge of the large pasture, was an old white barn. I decided to tackle the horse still in the fence so I could bring her down to the small pasture to keep her from escaping too. Maybe the others would follow. I had to walk clear to the other side of the pasture to get to the panicking horse. It was my mother's Psycho Appaloosa mare. I tried to catch her and nearly got trampled a few times trying. She was frothing at the mouth and her eye whites were really showing. Was I alarmed? No. As I said, Psycho. I noticed my other 6 were across the road. They were standing in a tiny little fenced area under a spotlight. They were standing motionless and not touching a blade of grass. I was wondering how the neighbor managed to herd them into that tiny fenced-in area with that tiny door. 3 of those horses were over 16 hands tall. 1 was a draft horse cross. The doorway was actually small enough. He touched both sides going through. My thoroughbred mare took me 2 hours to corral the last time she got out. Much to my frustration, she was an awesome jumper. So a stranger rounding them up and putting them into a tiny yard was mind-blowing. I've had horses since I was 9. I'm 32 now. I've had ponies and horses. I've had Appaloosas, Arabians, draft horses, quarter horses, walking horses, saddlebreds, thoroughbreds, Mustangs, foals, geldings, mares, and geldings that still thought they were stallions. I've had a lot of horses from all walks of life. I will tell you, they consistently do not like to be crammed into tight spaces, especially not in a group. I had 2 severely abused horses. I was rehabbing a thoroughbred that actually had PTSD and a racking horse that actually took me 3 years to touch without some sort of a bad reaction. They did not like being in stalls, and all but 1 were mares. Mares are extremely moody, and 2 of mine were particularly vicious to those they didn't like. My Walker mare only liked 3 other horses. She should have been kicking the crap out of the others there. Mine also didn't like to be under lights when they escaped. They avoided them like the plague, and not eating grass. That was over ankle deep. That was unheard of. They were silent and dead still. My neighbor came out and told me that they were like that when he found them. He asked me if I needed help, but I said no. My thoroughbred and racking horse mares did not like men. I told him I'd take them out, 1 at a time. I took 1 halter and lead and threw the rest outside the gate. I put the halter on my gelding and opened the gate to lead them out. They had other plans, though. All 6 came out as a freaking unit. They were literally chest to butt, crammed together. My gelding and my Welsh mare had their chests pushing against me as we walked back to the brown barn. Normally, they did not do this. I wouldn't usually allow such bad behavior. We were on the main road, which I did not like. The speed limit is only 35, but people go 60. So I tried to lead them through the large pasture gate. They wouldn't even go on that side of the road, though. I was a little unnerved by their behavior. So I lead them down to the brown barn and they went in. They were skittish, though. Picking at the hay I threw out, walking around restlessly, sticking to the barn like glue, and eyeing the upper pasture. I rationalize it by thinking, it's the Appy flipping out. That's unnerving them. And why hadn't she come down yet? She had to have seen us all walk down. I rushed to the gate between the little and big pastures, out of habit. I didn't want the herd to go back out into the big pasture. I didn't have to worry. They didn't follow me like they usually did. The gate was wide open, but the Appy was still running and squealing back and forth in the same area. I started to go get her. Now, the neighbor's security lights didn't really light up my pasture. The road was higher than my pasture, so it was cast in a shadow. I could make out her shape in some detail, though. She took off at a panic gallop, swerved sideways, and jumped the stream. When she landed, she nearly landed on her face. She caught herself, though, and took off at a dead gallop again. I ducked behind a stump. If she would have hit me, I would have been dead. I bent back and chained the gate. I decided to forego looking her over until I got the halters and leads. She was too hot at the moment. I decided to walk on the road instead of through the pasture. Again, the pasture was uneven, unlit, and full of springs. Sometime during this, clouds had taken over the sky, so there was no moonlight to see by. The spot on the road where I was at was paved and pretty well lit. Though my neighbor was paranoid as mentioned, I had almost gotten to the white barn when I got this sudden urge to stop and look at a very specific spot in the pasture. I would like to say it was instinct that told me to look, but usually I'd scan the woods first to see what was watching me. That's usually where the watchers are. Instead, I just flicked on my flashlight right on a certain spot. It was extremely close to where the mare was flipping out. I saw red eyes shine. My first thought was, why in the world would a deer be there with all that chaos? I was feeling a sense of extreme dread and didn't know why. Besides, it being where my horse was going nuts told me something else just wasn't right. I then realized where the eyes were relative to the walnut trees and my racing barrels. See, the road is above the pasture and the walnut trees were right at the same elevation as the road. The pasture itself is sloped to deal with the runoff from the road. The barrel it was next to was on the low end of the incline. The barrels were white, so I could see a dim lighting from my flashlight. On the one it was next to, this thing was too freaking big to be a deer. I was frozen, standing there, watching it. I just had this feeling it was evil and that I had to keep track of those eyes. It was watching me. It slowly blinked a few times. It also looked over into the woods above the pasture. I know you ask your guests if they ever feel there are other ones out there. Well, let me tell you, it crossed my mind. With a sinking stomach, I flashed my flashlight over the woods to see if I would catch eye shine. I didn't see any though, so I went right back to the eyes. They were still there. I flicked back and forth, making sure nothing was sneaking up on me. I don't know how long I stood there watching, frozen. Someone could have come around the bend and hit me with their car. I was so focused. Finally, it started to move off. It glanced at me sideways a few times, only one eye. I think it went into the copse of trees around the creek. I heard nothing. That wasn't surprising, though. The horses were still restless and making noises. I stood there a long time after looking for eyeshine. I was wondering if it could have been a bear. I didn't think so, though. The eyes were consistent in height until it disappeared. Bears are clumsy on their back legs. On this uneven, inclined ground, I have no doubt a bear would have dropped to the ground to go on all fours. Even the rear up and drop down behavior bears do when they're trying to see something wouldn't work. We had one cross our pasture before. He made a lot of noise, going through the woods. The horses settled down quicker with the bear. I was almost to my neighbors at this point. I considered leaving the couple. $100 of tech at his house, halters and leads aren't cheap. I had no doubt if I left them there, they'd be gone in the morning. My mother would be pissed. So I darted over, grabbed them, and ran like a bat out of hell. I know. I should have left the tech. I also know you're not supposed to run, but I couldn't even conceive what I had just seen. I got into the barn, threw the tack down, and hung with the horses. I wasn't going to go back up that pitch-black driveway on foot. I figured, with the horses, I'd have a warning, and the barn had plenty of sharp things. I didn't go back up until dawn. I was frozen stiff by that time. I've had years to think this over. It unnerves the crap out of me. How long was that thing there? Was that what was keeping the Oppie mare from coming down? Was it right there, in the shadows, while I was trying to catch her? Or was it in the unlit barn I walked through to get to the road? Was it the reason the Appy swerved and nearly fell? How did my horses get out? I never did find how they got out. Did they panic and jump the fence? I did check the fence line, away from the woods. I did look for tracks, around the barrel. Sadly, the ground was hard from frost that morning. But I will say the Appy mare was run for a good while. The ground was severely torn up and turned into a muddy mess. It was high noon when I went down there to check, and the ground had melted. I'll bet it was her that woke the neighbor up. It took them about a week to fully settle. I don't know if whatever it was still in the area, or if they were that traumatized. It wasn't too long after that my mother filed for divorce. My ex-stepfather got the farm and I moved in with her in the city. Even with all the weird crap going on there were non-bipedal things going on too. I miss it terribly. Maybe it's more accurate to say I miss the farm life rather than the actual place. I'd love to get back onto a farm again, but I probably hesitate to move back there. I never told anyone about the eye shine event. I didn't see the actual creature, and really, how do you convey that unnatural or horror-inducing feeling? You saw eye shine, whoop-dee-doo. My mother would have given me the benefit of the doubt, but my mother often told family members things. They made my life enough of a living hell. I didn't want to give it.
Thanks for listening and being part of our horror family of ghouls. Don't forget to hit a notification bell like button and subscribe. See you tomorrow.